Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I got the taxi just after midnight outside a pub near the edge of town. It wasn't busy, just a couple of people hanging around waiting for rides and one car idling near the curb. The driver leaned over and unlocked the door when I approached. Older guy, maybe late 50s, didn't say much. Just nodded when I told him the address. I got in the back, shut the door, and the car pulled away almost immediately. It was a normal start. The radio was low, some talk show I wasn't really listening to. The heater was on, a bit too warm, and the windows had that faint fogging you get on cold nights. I sat back, looking out the side window as we drove. The streets were mostly empty. A few parked cars, the occasional light in a house window, nothing unusual. About 5 minutes in, I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was just another car behind us, a headlight catching in the reflection of the window, but it didn't behave like one. It stayed in the same position, not getting closer, not falling back, just there. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to get a better angle. The light was visible in the glass, hovering above and behind the car. Not directly behind like a vehicle, higher, like it was somewhere above the road, following along. I turned my head to look out the rear window. There was nothing there, just darkness and the faint glow of distant streetlights. I looked back at the side window. The reflection showed it clearly, a pale, steady light keeping pace with us. I frowned and leaned forward slightly. "Do you see that?" I asked. The driver didn't respond. I waited a second. "Behind us," I said, a bit louder. He glanced in the rearview mirror, then back at the road. "See what?" he said. "The light." He shook his head slightly. "Just your reflection, probably." I sat back, but it wasn't my reflection. It was too bright, too defined, and it didn't move when I moved. I watched it for a while. It stayed exactly where it was, hovering in the reflection, matching our speed perfectly. We passed a junction. Normally you'd see headlights shift, change angles, move relative to the car. This didn't. It stayed fixed. I looked out the window again, directly. Still nothing. Just the road, dark and empty. But in the glass, it was there, following. The air in the car felt off. Not immediately noticeable, but after a few minutes, I realized it felt thicker. The heater was still on, but the warmth felt muted somehow. My ears popped. I swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed for a second, then eased slightly. I looked at the driver again. He seemed completely normal. Hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the road, posture relaxed. The radio had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed when. No static, no voice, just silence. I leaned forward and looked at the dashboard. Everything seemed normal. Speed steady, no warning lights, but the interior lights looked dimmer. Not off, just reduced, like the brightness had been turned down without actually changing anything. I leaned back again. The light in the reflection hadn't changed. It pulsed once, softly, barely noticeable, but enough. My fingers tingled slightly where they rested on my leg. I shifted them, rubbing them together. The feeling didn't go away. I looked back out the rear window again. Still nothing. No source. No explanation. I turned back to the side window. The light seemed closer now. Not physically, just more present, like it was pressing into the space around the car. The edges of it looked strange, not sharp, not blurred. More like the air around it was bending slightly. I blinked. The light dimmed slightly, then returned to its original level. My ears popped again, sharper this time. The pressure built quickly, then held. I opened my mouth to say something to the driver. Nothing came out at first, then when it did, it sounded wrong. Flat. Like it wasn't carrying properly. The driver didn't react. The car kept moving. The road ahead looked normal, but it felt like we'd been driving longer than we should have. I checked my phone. No signal. The time read 12:51. That didn't seem right. I'd gotten in around 12:10. The drive should have been 15 minutes, maybe 20 at most. It hadn't felt that long. I looked back at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like something shifting behind it. Then it was gone. The light pulsed again, stronger this time. The pressure in my ears peaked. Then everything snapped back. The radio came on suddenly, loud enough to make me flinch. The interior lights brightened, the air felt normal again. I blinked. The reflection in the window showed nothing, no light, just the dark road behind us. I looked out the rear window again. Still nothing. The driver spoke for the first time in a while. "Nearly there," he said. His voice sounded normal, like nothing had happened. A minute later, we pulled up outside my house. The car stopped. I sat there for a second, trying to process it. Then I reached for my wallet. The fare meter caught my eye. I froze. The distance was wrong, way off. It showed nearly double what the route should have been. I looked at the time again, 1:26. I stared at it. There was no way the drive had taken that long. It hadn't felt like more than 20 minutes. I looked at the driver. He didn't seem concerned. Just waited, hand resting on the wheel. "Bit higher than usual," I said, nodding toward the meter. He shrugged. "That's what it says." I paid him. Didn't argue. Got out of the car. The night air felt sharp and normal. I stood there for a second, watching the taxi pull away. As it turned the corner, I looked at the rear window one last time. There was nothing following it. Just the car, disappearing down the street. I went inside, checked my phone again. The time hadn't changed. 1:27. I stood in the hallway for a while, trying to remember the drive, the turns we took, the roads we passed. But there were gaps, whole stretches I couldn't account for, like pieces had been skipped over. I haven't taken a taxi that late since, not on my own. I was the last one in the office that night. It wasn't unusual. I handled end-of-day reports, and sometimes that pushed me past midnight. Most people cleared out by 6, cleaning staff came through around 9, and after that, the whole floor was empty. The building was 12 stories, all glass on one side facing the city. My desk sat about 10 feet back from the windows, with a clear view across the skyline. It was late enough that most of the surrounding buildings had gone dark. A few scattered lights here and there, but nothing moving. I remember checking the time before it started. 11:52. I was halfway through a spreadsheet, nothing complicated, just repetitive. The only sounds were the low hum of the air system and the faint whir from the computers. Everything felt normal. Then I noticed the reflection. At first, I thought it was something behind me, a light moving across the office floor, maybe from the hallway. I turned around, nothing. The lights in the office were steady, no one there. I turned back to the windows. That's when I saw it. A faint glow, outside, moving slowly past the glass. It wasn't bright, just enough to stand out against the darkness. Pale white, slightly diffused, like it didn't have a solid edge. I frowned and leaned forward a bit. We were 12 floors up. There shouldn't have been anything that close to the building. No cranes, no platforms, nothing that could hover at that height. The glow continued moving. Smooth. Steady. Not rising or falling, just sliding along the outside of the building, level with the floor I was on. I stood up, walked closer to the windows. The city below was still. Cars moved far beneath, tiny and distant. Nothing near the building itself. I looked directly out, trying to see what could be causing it. There was nothing there, but in the reflection, it was clear. Moving past. I glanced down at the glass itself, trying to catch the source at an angle. Still nothing. Just the reflection. The air in the office felt different, subtle at first, then more noticeable, heavier, like the space had thickened slightly. I swallowed. My ears popped. I rubbed my jaw, trying to clear the pressure. It didn't go away right away. The hum of the air system faded, not completely, just reduced, like someone had turned the volume down. I looked back at the glow. It slowed, not by much, but enough that I noticed. It was almost directly in front of me now. The reflection showed it clearly, hovering just beyond the glass. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it, not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending. I stepped closer. The glass felt cool under my hand. The glow pulsed once. Soft, barely noticeable. My fingers tingled where they touched the window. I pulled my hand back. The tingling stayed. I looked around the office. Everything seemed slightly off. The edges of desks, the lines of the floor, nothing had moved, but it all felt less solid. The glow outside dimmed slightly, then brightened again. The pressure in my ears increased. Sharp. I winced and swallowed again. My chest felt tight. Breathing took more effort. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the sound didn't come out right. Flat, muted, like it didn't belong in the room. The glow drifted forward again, still smooth, still silent. Then it stopped, right in front of the window. The reflection showed it hovering there, steady. The distortion inside it seemed stronger now, more pronounced, like something was just out of focus. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then everything went quiet, completely. The air system stopped, the computers went silent, no hum, no background noise at all, just that glow and the pressure in my ears. I blinked. The glow pulsed again, stronger this time. For a second, I thought the glass itself shifted, not physically, just the way it reflected the light. Then, everything snapped back, all at once. The computers beeped, the monitors went black, then rebooted, every single one. Across the floor, the air system kicked in again. The hum returned, loud and sudden. I flinched, looked back at the window. The glow was gone, no fade, no movement away, just gone. The glass showed only the dark city outside. I stood there trying to catch up. The computers around me continued restarting, screens lighting up one by one. The usual startup sounds filled the room. I looked down at my own monitor. It was rebooting too. The spreadsheet was gone, unsaved. I checked the time on my phone. 12:37. I stared at it. There was no way that much time had passed. It had felt like minutes, maybe less. I walked slowly back to my desk and sat down. My hands still tingled slightly. Not strong, just enough to notice. The office felt normal again, everything in place. But I kept looking at the windows, expecting something else to move past them. Nothing did. When the computers finished rebooting, everything looked normal. No error messages, no sign anything had happened. I stayed a bit longer than I needed to, just sitting there, watching the glass. Eventually, I packed up and left. The hallway lights felt too bright, too normal. Now, whenever I work late, I keep my desk light on and the blinds half closed. Not all the way, just enough that I don't have to see the reflection clearly. The laundry room in my building is in the basement, down a narrow set of concrete stairs off the main hallway. It's not somewhere you hang around longer than you have to. Low ceiling, fluorescent lights, and that constant mix of detergent and damp fabric. I usually go late at night because it's empty. No waiting for machines, no small talk. That night, I went down around 11:40 with a basket and a bottle of detergent tucked under my arm. The hallway upstairs was quiet, no TVs through the walls, no doors opening, just that faint, constant hum the building always has. The stairwell felt colder as I went down. The laundry room door sticks a bit, so you have to push it harder than you expect. It gave way with a dull creak, and I stepped inside. Everything looked normal. 4 washers along the left wall, 4 dryers on the right. 2 of the washers were already running, one near the back, one closer to the middle. No one else in the room. I set my basket down on one of the plastic chairs and started loading a machine near the front. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, steady and harsh, the kind that makes everything look slightly washed out. I didn't notice anything off at first. I put in the detergent, closed the washer door, and started the cycle. The machine kicked in with a low churn, water beginning to fill. I leaned back against the wall and checked my phone. 11:48. I had about 40 minutes to wait. The sound of the machine settled into that usual rhythm, water sloshing, motors humming, a steady, predictable noise. Then the lights flickered. Just once, a quick dip. I looked up, expecting them to stabilize. They did. For a second. Then they flickered again. Longer this time. The room dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again. The hum of the machines wavered slightly, like they were struggling to keep up. I stood up straight. The flickering stopped. The lights held steady. The machines returned to their normal rhythm. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Probably just the building's wiring, I thought. It's old. I picked up my phone again. Then I noticed the glow. It was coming from the small window near the back wall. It's one of those narrow basement windows, set high up just above ground level. Normally you only see a strip of pavement and the bottom of a hedge through it. Now, it was lit, not brightly, just a soft, pale light filling the frame. I frowned and walked toward it. The glow wasn't like a streetlight. It didn't have that yellow tint. It was white, flat, even. I stood a few feet away, looking up at it. There was no movement outside, no shadows passing, no sign of a car or anything else, just that steady light. Behind me, the machines were still running. The sound was slightly different now, quieter, like it had been dampened. I turned around. The washers were moving, but the noise didn't match the motion. It felt out of sync. I stepped back from the window. The glow didn't change. It stayed fixed, filling the small space. The lights overhead flickered again. This time they didn't come back right away. The room dropped into a dim gray half-light. The machine slowed, the hum faded, then stopped. All at once. Silence. Complete. I stood there, listening. Nothing. No building hum, no water movement, no distant noise from above. Just that soft glow from the window. The air felt heavier. Breathing took more effort than it should have. My ears popped, sharp and sudden. I swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed. I turned slowly, looking at the machines. They were still. Water visible through the glass doors, frozen in place. I took a step closer to one of them, the one near the back. Its door looked off. Not open, but not fully closed either. I leaned in. The latch wasn't engaged. I was sure it had been. I'd heard it click earlier when the cycle started. I reached out and touched the door. It moved slightly under my hand, loose. I pulled it open a few inches. Water shifted inside, sloshing slightly, but there was no sound. None. I froze. The glow from the window pulsed softly, like a slow breath. The pressure in my ears increased. My fingers tingled where they touched the door. I let go. The door stayed slightly open. I stepped back. The room felt wrong, like it had been separated from everything else. I looked at the window again. The glow seemed thicker now, not brighter, just denser. For a second, I thought I saw something beyond it, not clearly, just a distortion like the air was bending. Then it settled again. The glow dimmed slightly. Then everything came back. The lights snapped on, bright and harsh. The machines kicked in all at once, the sudden noise making me flinch. Water churned, motors hummed, the normal sound filling the room again. I blinked. The window was dark, just the usual faint outline of the outside. I looked back at the washers. They were all running, except one. The one near the back. Its door was open, wide enough that the cycle had stopped. Water pooled inside, unmoving. I stared at it. No one else had come in. No one had touched it. I walked over slowly and closed the door. It clicked into place. The machine resumed its cycle like nothing had happened. I stood there for a while, listening to the normal sounds, trying to match what I just experienced with what was in front of me. It didn't line up. I checked my phone. 12:36. I frowned. I'd started the wash at 11:48. It hadn't felt like nearly an hour had passed. It had felt like minutes. I finished the laundry without anything else happening. When I went back upstairs, the hallway felt normal again, warm, familiar. The hum of the building was back. But now, every time I go down there late at night, I glance at that window before I start anything, just to make sure it's dark. I usually ran the same trail every evening after work. It loops around a low hill just outside town, mostly dirt path with patches of grass and gravel. Nothing remote, but once you get past the first stretch, you don't see many people. That evening, it was getting dark, earlier than I expected. Not fully night, just that fading light, where everything turns gray-blue and the shadows get longer. The air was still, no wind, just a steady coolness that made running feel easier. I had my headphones in, music playing, same playlist I always used. I remember the exact song because it cut off halfway through. But before that, everything felt normal. I'd started at the usual entrance, did the first incline, and came up to the section where the trail runs parallel to a small hill on the right. It's not steep, just rises up about 20 or 30 feet above the path, covered in short grass and a few scattered trees. I'd run that part hundreds of times. I was about halfway along that stretch when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was someone up on the hill with a torch or a phone. But it wasn't moving like that. It was hovering, just above the top of the hill, maybe 10 feet off the ground. White, steady, no flicker. Not bright enough to light up everything around it, but bright enough that it stood out clearly against the dim sky. I slowed down a bit, more out of instinct than anything. The light didn't move. It stayed fixed in one spot, like it was anchored there. I pulled one earbud out so I could hear better. That's when the music cut, mid-song. Just stopped. No fade, no glitch. Silence. I glanced down at my phone strapped to my arm. The screen was still on. The song was still playing according to the display, but there was no sound. I tapped the screen. Nothing changed. I looked back up at the hill. The light seemed closer. Not because it had moved, just because it felt more present. The air around me felt different, heavier, like it had more weight to it. My ears popped. I swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed. I stopped running completely. Stood there on the path, looking up at the light. Everything else had gone quiet. No birds, no distant cars, no wind through the trees. Just that stillness. The light pulsed once, softly, barely noticeable. But enough. I felt a tingling in my hands, where they hung at my sides. I flexed my fingers. The feeling didn't go away. I took a step forward. The ground felt slightly off under my feet. Not uneven, just less solid. Like I wasn't getting the same feedback through my shoes. I stopped again. The light held steady. For a second, I thought I saw something beneath it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending around it. I blinked. It looked normal again. The pressure in my ears increased, sharp enough that I winced. My chest felt tight. Breathing took more effort. I don't remember deciding to move, but I did. One step forward, then another. Then nothing. The next thing I remember, my music came back. Mid-song, right where it had cut off. The sound snapped into my ears so suddenly I flinched. I looked around. The trail was different. I was further along, past the bend that comes after the hill. A section I knew took at least 10 minutes to reach from where I'd been. I stopped, turned around. The hill was behind me now. The light was gone. Just the dark outline of grass and trees against the sky. I stood there trying to piece it together. I checked my phone. The time had jumped, not by a huge amount, but enough, about 25 minutes ahead of where it should have been. It hadn't felt like that. It had felt like seconds, maybe a minute at most. I looked back up at the hill. Nothing. No glow, no movement, just stillness. I stood there for a while, not sure whether to keep going or turn back. Eventually, I started jogging again. Slower this time, more aware of everything around me. The rest of the run was normal. Sounds came back. The air felt right again. My breathing settled, but something felt off, like I'd skipped a section of time without noticing. When I got home, I checked my running app. It tracked distance and pace. There was a gap, a straight line on the map where the GPS hadn't recorded anything, just a jump from one point on the trail to another. No path between them, like I'd been moved. The timestamp matched the gap, about 20 minutes missing. I stared at it for a while. Then I closed the app. I still run that trail, but I don't go at dusk anymore. And when I pass that hill, I don't look up. I used to cut across the school field on my way home from late shifts. It saved maybe 10 minutes compared to sticking to the roads, and after a while, you stop thinking about how empty it is at night. It was a secondary school, big open playing field with a fence around most of it, but there's a gap near the corner where people have pushed through over the years. That's where I always went in. That night it was dry, cold, and completely still. No wind, no rain, just that quiet you get when everything's settled. It was a little after midnight. The houses around the field had their lights off for the most part, and the school building itself was dark. I climbed through the gap in the fence and stepped onto the grass. It felt normal underfoot. Slightly damp, but nothing unusual. I had my phone in my pocket, no music, just walking. You could hear the faint sound of the main road in the distance, but it was far enough away that it didn't carry much. I'd crossed that field dozens of times. There's a worn path that cuts diagonally from one corner to the opposite side. I stuck to that, more out of habit than anything. About halfway across, I noticed the light. It wasn't obvious at first, just a faint change in how the grass looked ahead of me. A patch that seemed slightly brighter than the rest. I slowed down. At first, I thought maybe it was a security light from the school building hitting at a weird angle. But when I looked toward the building, everything there was dark. I kept walking. As I got closer, the light became clearer. It was a wide patch, maybe 10 or 12 feet across, sitting right over the grass. Pale, almost white, but soft. Not harsh or focused like a spotlight. The edges weren't sharp, they just faded into the surrounding darkness. I stopped a few steps away from it. The rest of the field looked normal. Dark, flat, empty. This one patch looked like it was being lit from above. I glanced up. Nothing. Just the sky. Clouded over, no stars visible, no streetlights nearby that could have reached that far. I took a step closer. The grass inside the light looked slightly different. Not in color, just in texture, like it was being pressed down gently, even though there was no wind. I stepped into it. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It was warmer. Not by a lot, but enough that it stood out against the cold air around it, like stepping into a room that's been heated slightly. I paused. My breath didn't show as much in front of me. The air felt thicker, not hard to breathe, just different. I took another step further in. The light didn't change, it stayed steady, evenly covering the ground. I held my hands out slightly, more out of instinct than anything. That's when I felt it, a faint tingling. At first, I thought it was just from the cold, like when your fingers start to warm up again, but it wasn't quite that. It was more even, running across my fingertips, then up into my palms. I rubbed my hands together. The feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. I looked down at the grass. For a second, I thought I saw something shift beneath it. Not moving, just deeper. Like the surface wasn't solid in the way it should have been. I blinked. It looked normal again. The tingling spread slightly up my wrists, not painful, just enough to make me aware of it. The air around me felt heavier. My ears popped. Sharp. I swallowed, but the pressure lingered. The rest of the field had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed when it happened, but now it was obvious. No distant traffic, no wind, nothing. Just me standing in that patch of light. I took a step back. The moment I crossed the edge, the temperature dropped again. The cold air hit me properly. The tingling in my hands didn't stop, but it eased slightly. I turned around and looked at the patch. It was still there, unchanged, sitting in the middle of the field like it didn't belong. For a second, I thought about stepping back in just to see if anything else would happen, but something in me said not to. I stayed where I was. The light pulsed once, subtle, barely noticeable, but enough. My ears popped again. The pressure returned for a second, then faded. I took another step back, then another. I kept my eyes on it as I moved toward the far side of the field. The patch stayed where it was. No movement, no change, just that steady glow. I didn't turn my back on it until I reached the fence on the other side. I climbed through and stepped onto the pavement. When I looked back, the field was dark, no light, no patch, just empty grass. I stood there for a second, trying to adjust to the normal darkness. The sounds came back gradually. Distant cars, a dog barking somewhere, the usual background noise. I checked my phone, 12:48. I frowned. I'd entered the field around 12:15. It shouldn't have taken more than 10 minutes to cross. Even stopping, it didn't feel like more than a few minutes. I walked the rest of the way home, rubbing my hands together. The tingling stayed for a while, faded slowly, like it was working its way out rather than stopping all at once. When I got home, I went straight to the sink and ran my hands under warm water. They looked normal. No marks, no redness, just normal. But the feeling lingered, faintly, for the rest of the night. The next day, I passed the field again in daylight. Nothing there, just grass. Flat, slightly worn where people walk across it. No sign of anything unusual. I still cut across sometimes, but I don't walk through the middle anymore. I stay closer to the edge. And if I see anything on the ground that looks even slightly out of place, I go around it. I was in the hospital overnight with my dad. Nothing critical, just observation after a minor surgery, but they wanted someone to stay with him because he was still groggy from the anesthesia. The room was on the 6th floor, facing the back of the building. Not much to look at, just a parking structure, a few trees, and beyond that, the dark outline of other buildings. It was quiet in that way hospitals get at night. Not silent, but controlled. The steady beeping from the monitor next to his bed, the soft hum of the air system, the occasional distant footsteps in the corridor. I was sitting in one of those plastic chairs by the window, half awake, scrolling on my phone. It was around 2 a.m., maybe a little later. My dad was asleep. Deep, steady breathing. The monitor showed normal readings, heart rate, oxygen levels, all that. I remember checking the time, 2:17. Then I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was just a reflection in the glass, something from inside the room catching at the right angle. But when I shifted slightly, it stayed in the same place, outside, just beyond the window. I leaned forward a bit, squinting. It was bright. Not blinding, but stronger than anything else in the area. A steady white light, hovering at roughly the same height as the window. Too high to be from the ground. Too still to be anything moving. I stood up slowly and stepped closer. The glass felt cool when I put my hand against it. The light didn't flicker, didn't sway, didn't make any sound, just hovered there. I looked down, expecting to see some kind of vehicle or equipment below that might be casting it upward. There was nothing. The parking structure lights were dim and yellow. This was different, clean, pale, even. I glanced back at my dad, still asleep. The monitor kept its steady rhythm, beep, beep, beep. I looked back out the window. The light seemed closer, not by movement, just by presence. Like it was pressing into the space outside the glass. The edges of it weren't sharp. They blurred slightly into the darkness around it. For a second, I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending inside the glow. I leaned closer to the window. My ears popped, sharp and sudden. I winced and swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed for a second, then settled. I became aware of the sound, or the lack of it. The monitor had stopped. I turned around. The screen was still on. Numbers frozen. No beeping. The air system hum had cut out too. The room felt sealed off. Heavy. I took a step back from the window. The light didn't change. It just stayed there, steady and silent. I looked at my dad again. He hadn't moved. His chest rose and fell slowly, but the monitor wasn't reflecting it anymore. I walked over to the machine and looked closer. The numbers were still. No fluctuation, no sound. I tapped the side of it lightly. Nothing. I felt a tightness in my chest. Not panic, just pressure. Like the air had thickened. I looked back at the window. The light pulsed slowly, brightened slightly, then dimmed, like breathing. The pressure in my ears increased again. My fingertips tingled. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled slowly. The sound of it felt muted, like it wasn't fully reaching the room. I don't remember deciding to move closer again, but I did, step by step, back toward the window. The light seemed to fill more of my vision. The edges of the room softened. For a moment, I thought I could see something just beyond it. Not clearly. Just the suggestion of depth, like looking through fog at something that didn't want to come into focus. The light pulsed again. My ears popped sharply. And then, everything came back, all at once. The monitor beeped loudly, making me flinch. The air system kicked in. Distant footsteps echoed in the hallway. I blinked. The light was gone. The window showed only the dark outside, the faint glow of distant streetlights. I stood there for a second, trying to catch up. The monitor next to my dad showed normal readings again. Numbers moving, beeping steady. I looked down at my phone. 2:54. I frowned. I was sure it had been just after 2:15 when I first noticed the light. There was no way that much time had passed. It hadn't felt like that. It had felt like minutes. I sat back down in the chair. My hands felt slightly numb. Not cold, just dull. I flexed my fingers, trying to shake it off. The room felt normal again, everything in its place. But I couldn't stop looking at the window. Every few seconds I'd glance back, half expecting the light to return. It didn't. Around 3:10, a nurse came in to check on my dad. She smiled, asked how he was doing. I almost said something about the monitor stopping, but I didn't. She would have seen it in the logs if something had actually happened. She adjusted a few things, checked his vitals, and left. Everything looked normal. Later, when I checked my phone again, I noticed something. My step counter, it logs movement automatically. There was a gap, from 2:18 to 2:49. No movement recorded, just a flat line. But I knew I'd been standing, walking, moving around the room. I'd gone from the chair to the window to the bed, back again. Except according to that, I hadn't moved at all. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, watching the window, waiting to see if the light would come back. It didn't. I leave for work at the same time every morning. 5:10, give or take a minute. It's early enough that the roads are mostly empty, especially where I live. Edge of an industrial estate with long stretches of warehouses and fenced yards. It was late February, still dark at that hour. Not pitch black, but that deep pre-dawn blue where everything looks flat and slightly off. No frost that morning, just cold and dry. I'd driven that route so many times I didn't really think about it anymore. Same turns, same timing. There's a stretch about 10 minutes in where the road runs alongside a row of industrial yards, big fenced-off lots with stacked pallets, containers, that sort of thing. Normally, it's dead quiet. No lights except the occasional security lamp. That morning, I noticed something different before I even reached the yard. The radio cut out. Not completely, just dropped to a low hiss for a second, then came back. I glanced at the dashboard, thinking maybe I'd brushed the volume or something. Everything looked normal. I kept driving. A few seconds later, it happened again. This time the dashboard lights dimmed slightly at the same time. Not off, just dipped, like the power had been pulled back for a second. Then everything returned to normal. I frowned, tapped the steering wheel lightly. The car's not new, but it's never had electrical issues. I slowed a little, just in case. As I came up alongside the first yard, I saw the light. It was low, much lower than anything that should have been in the air, hovering just above the fence line, maybe 10 feet up, sitting over the center of the yard. At first, I thought it was one of those portable work lights, the kind they set up on sites, but this wasn't fixed to the ground. It was just there. A soft white glow, not harsh, but bright enough to clearly outline the tops of the containers beneath it. No beam, no source I could see, just a solid, contained light. I slowed further, my foot easing off the accelerator without really thinking about it. The road was empty, no cars behind me, none coming the other way. I glanced at the yard itself. No movement, no workers, no vehicles, just that light, hovering in place. Then the dashboard dimmed again. More noticeably this time, the radio dropped to silence. Not static, nothing. The engine kept running, but it sounded distant, like it was coming from further away than it should have. I tightened my grip onto the wheel. The air inside the car felt heavier, not stuffy, just thick. My ears popped. I swallowed, but the pressure stayed. I looked back at the light. It hadn't moved, but it felt closer. Not physically, not in distance, just more present. Like it was pushing into the space around it. The edges of it looked strange. Not sharp, like not blurred. More like the air around it was shifting slightly, bending in a way that didn't match the rest of the scene. I realized I was drifting toward the edge of the road and corrected the wheel. The steering felt slightly delayed, like there was a fraction of a second between input and response. I eased off the gas completely. The car slowed, rolling forward. The dashboard lights dimmed again, lower this time. The digital clock flickered. For a second, it showed nothing at all, then came back. I glanced at it. 5:22. That didn't seem right. I'd left at 5:10. The yard was about 10 minutes away, but it hadn't felt like 12 minutes had passed. It had felt like 5. I looked back up at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something beneath it, not clearly, just a darker shape, like a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Then it shifted, or I blinked, and it was gone. The light pulsed once. Subtle, but enough to notice. The pressure in my ears increased, sharp enough that I winced. My fingers tingled on the wheel. The car kept rolling forward, slow, steady. I remember thinking I should stop, just pull over, figure out what was happening, but I didn't. I just kept moving. The light stayed where it was. The road curved slightly, bringing me alongside it for a moment longer. Then, everything snapped back. The radio came on full volume for a split second before settling. The dashboard lights brightened, the engine sounded normal again. I blinked. The yard was dark. No light, no glow, nothing. Just the fence, the containers, and the usual security lamp near the gate. I straightened up in my seat. The road ahead looked normal. I drove on, a bit faster now, trying to shake the feeling. A few minutes later, something didn't feel right. The landmarks were off. The turn I usually take, the one that leads toward the motorway, should have been coming up. It wasn't. I kept driving. Another minute passed. Then I saw a sign, one I recognized, but it was further along the route than I should have been. I slowed down, heart starting to pick up. I checked the clock. 5:47. I stared at it. There was no way. I should have been on the motorway by then, halfway to work. Instead, I'd missed my exit completely. I didn't remember passing it. I didn't remember any of the road between the yard and where I was now. I pulled over onto the side of the road and sat there, engine idling. Everything inside the car was normal again. No dimming, no silence, just the usual hum. I looked back in the direction I'd come from. Nothing there. Just the road stretching back into the dark. I sat there for a few minutes trying to piece it together, but there was nothing to grab onto. No gap I could feel. No moment where things went blank. Just that light. And then being further down the road than I should have been. Eventually I turned around and drove back to the exit I'd missed. I made it to work late. I didn't mention any of it. But now, every time I pass that stretch of road before sunrise, I slow down a little and I look at that yard. Just in case the light's there again. I was walking home the long way, cutting along the edge of a wooded area that runs behind a row of houses. It's not a proper forest, just a stretch of old trees and undergrowth that no one ever cleared. There's a narrow dirt path that follows the boundary, and I usually take it when I want to avoid the main road. It was early evening, just before it gets fully dark. That dull gray-blue light where everything blends together. The air was still a bit colder than it had been during the day, but not uncomfortable. I had my hands in my pockets, just walking at a normal pace. No headphones, no distractions. You could hear the usual stuff: birds settling down, the faint rustle of leaves, distant traffic behind the houses. Nothing unusual. I was about halfway along the path when I noticed the glow. It wasn't right next to me. It was deeper in the trees, maybe 30 or 40 feet in, partially obscured by trunks and branches. At first, I thought it was someone with a torch walking through there, the kind of light you'd get from a phone or a small flashlight. But it didn't move like that. It was smoother, slower. It drifted sideways between the trees, not bobbing or shifting the way a person's light would. I stopped walking. The glow was pale, not bright enough to fully light the trees around it, but enough that you could clearly see it moving through the gaps. I leaned slightly to get a better angle. It kept moving. No sound, no crunch of leaves, no snapping twigs, just that steady glide. I took a step closer to the edge of the trees. The ground there dips slightly, so you can see a bit further in if you angle yourself right. That's when I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped, completely. No chirping, no movement in the branches. The faint sound of wind through the leaves was gone too. Even the distant traffic seemed quieter, like it had been pushed further away. I stood there, listening. Nothing. The glow continued moving. Still smooth. Still silent. I tried to track it through the trees, but it was hard to keep it in view. Every time it passed behind a trunk, it disappeared for a second before reappearing on the other side. At one point, I thought it had stopped. Then it shifted again, slightly to the left. The motion didn't feel natural. Not like something walking, more like something sliding. I felt a pressure in my ears, subtle at first, then sharper. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't go away. The air felt heavier. Breathing took a bit more effort than it should have. I stepped back onto the path. The glow didn't react. It just kept moving deeper between the trees. For a second, I thought I saw something around it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending slightly where it passed. I blinked. The glow dimmed, then brightened again. A slow pulse. My chest felt tight. Not panic, just pressure. I looked away for a second, just long enough to glance back down the path to check if anyone else was around. There wasn't. When I looked back, it was gone. Not fading, not moving out of sight, just gone. The space where it had been was empty, dark, still. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out if I'd just lost track of it. Maybe it had moved further in, beyond where I could see. But there was no hint of it anywhere. No residual glow. Nothing. The silence broke, all at once. Birds started up again, scattered and uneven at first, then normal. Leaves rustled lightly in a breeze I hadn't felt before. The distant traffic noise came back. Everything snapped into place like it had been paused and then resumed. I stayed there longer than I should have, watching the trees, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I kept walking, faster this time. I didn't look back again until I reached the end of the path. When I got home, I checked my phone, out of habit more than anything. The time was 7:42. I frowned. I'd entered the path around 7:10. It shouldn't have taken more than 15 minutes to walk it, even slowly. I tried to think back. The moment I first saw the glow, the steps I took toward the trees, looking away, looking back. It didn't feel like half an hour. It felt like maybe 5 minutes. I opened the step tracker. There was a gap from 7:18 to 7:36. No steps recorded, just a flat line. But I knew I'd been standing, moving, shifting my weight, except it showed nothing. I put the phone down and sat there for a while. Later that night, I looked out the back window toward the trees. You can't see much from the house, just the edge of the woods and a few branches against the sky. Everything looked normal. But now, when I walk that path at dusk, I stay further away from the tree line and I don't stop if I see anything moving between them. I noticed the garage door before I even fully woke up. My bedroom faces the front of the house, and there's a small window above the garage that lets a bit of light in when it's open. Usually in the morning, it's dark there unless I've already gone down and opened it. That morning, there was light. Not bright. Just enough to notice through half-open eyes. I lay there for a second, trying to place it. My brain was still slow, not fully awake yet. Then it clicked. The garage. I always close it at night. Always. It's one of those habits you don't even think about anymore. Lock the back door, check the windows, hit the garage button, watch it shut. I sat up. The light was definitely coming from outside through the garage window. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table. 6:12 a.m. Earlier than I usually wake up. I got out of bed and went straight to the window. The driveway was visible from there, and the garage door was halfway open. Not fully, just raised enough that you could see the bottom half of the car inside. I frowned. That didn't make sense. If I'd left it open by accident, it would have been fully open, not stuck halfway. I went downstairs. The house felt normal. No signs of anything off. No doors open, no windows unlocked. But there was a smell, faint but noticeable. Sharp. Not exactly like burning, more like ozone. Like the smell you get after lightning or from certain electronics overheating. It was stronger near the door leading into the garage. I paused there for a second, hand on the handle. Then I opened it. The garage light was off. Daylight was coming in from the partially open door, casting a strip of pale light across the floor. The smell was stronger inside. I stepped in slowly. Everything looked mostly normal at first glance. The car was where I left it, centered between the shelves. Tools on the walls, boxes stacked near the back. But then I noticed the keys. They were on the floor, about 2 feet away from the driver's side door. I stopped. I hadn't left them there. I always put them in the bowl on the kitchen counter. Same place every night. I looked back toward the house, half expecting to see them sitting where they should have been. The counter was empty. I walked over to the keys. They were just lying there, like they'd been dropped. No scratches on the floor, no sign they'd been kicked or slid, just placed. I crouched down and picked them up. They felt slightly warmer than I expected. Not hot. Just not cold, like everything else in the garage. I straightened up and looked around. That's when I noticed the car door. The driver's side was slightly open. Not enough to see from outside, but enough that the seal wasn't fully closed. I walked over and pulled it open. The interior looked normal. Nothing out of place on the seats or dashboard. But the faint smell was stronger here. I leaned in slightly. The dashboard lights flickered once, just a brief pulse, like the car was trying to wake up without the key in the ignition. Then it stopped. I stepped back. My ears popped. Not painful, just sudden. I swallowed, trying to clear it, but the pressure lingered for a second before easing. The garage felt quiet. Too quiet. No distant cars, no birds, nothing from the street. Just that faint, sharp smell and the stillness of everything. I turned and looked at the garage door. It was still halfway open. The light coming through it didn't seem to shift the way it should have as I moved. For a second, I thought it looked thicker, not brighter, just denser. I blinked. It looked normal again. I walked over to the control panel on the wall and pressed the button. The door hesitated, just for a second. Then it started moving, closing the rest of the way with the usual mechanical hum. As it came down, the light from outside narrowed and disappeared. The garage went dim. The smell faded slightly. Not gone, just less noticeable. I stood there for a moment, keys still in my hand, trying to piece together what might have happened. Maybe I'd dropped them when I came in and hadn't noticed. Maybe I'd left the car door open slightly. Maybe the garage door had malfunctioned. All of it had explanations. Individually. Together, it didn't sit right. I went back inside and put the keys where they should have been. Then I checked the front door. Locked. Back door. Locked. Windows, all closed. I made coffee, trying to shake the feeling. When I came back into the kitchen, I glanced at the counter. The keys were still there, exactly where I'd left them. I went to work like normal. Tried not to think about it too much. But later that day, I checked the security app on my phone. The garage camera had a motion log. There was a gap. From 2:03 a.m. to 3:41 a.m., no footage, just a blank section where there should have been recordings. The last frame before the gap showed the garage door closed. The first frame after showed it halfway open. I watched both clips a few times. There was no transition, no opening, just closed, then open. I haven't left the keys anywhere but the counter since. And every night before I go to bed, I stand in the doorway to the garage for a few seconds, just to make sure everything is where it should be. I was on the roof because the TV signal had been cutting out all evening. It's an old place, semi-detached, 70s build, still has one of those metal antennas bolted to the chimney. Normally it works fine, but whenever the weather shifts, the picture starts breaking up into blocks and then drops completely. It was just after sunset, that kind of dull blue light where everything looks flat and quiet. No wind, which was unusual. The air felt still, almost heavy. I dragged the ladder out from the shed and propped it against the side of the house. My neighbor, Carl, was out earlier washing his car, and he joked about me climbing up there again. I remember that because he'd already gone inside by the time I started up. The roof tiles were slightly damp, so I took it slow. One hand on the ridge, 1 foot at a time. The antenna was mounted near the chimney, angled slightly off from where it should have been. I reached it and grabbed the metal pole. It felt colder than I expected, not just from the evening air, colder, like it had been sitting in shade all day. I gave it a small twist. Inside the house, I could hear the TV faintly through the open window below. The static shifted slightly, like it was trying to lock onto something. I adjusted it again, just a few degrees. The static changed pitch. I paused, listening. Then I felt it, a vibration. Not strong, just a faint, steady tremor running through the antenna and into my hand. At first, I thought it was just me, maybe my grip slipping or the metal reacting to the movement. But when I stopped moving completely, it was still there. A low, constant hum you could feel more than hear. I tightened my grip around the pole. The vibration didn't change. I looked up. At first, I didn't see anything. The sky was that deep blue just before it goes fully dark. No stars yet, no planes, no movement. Then something caught my eye. Above the houses, slightly to the right, a shape. It was hard to focus on at first, like it didn't want to be seen directly. I had to shift my gaze slightly to the side to make it out properly. It was hovering, not high up, much lower than any plane should be, maybe a few hundred feet above the rooftops, if that. It didn't have lights, at least not blinking ones like you'd expect. It was just there, a dark, metallic shape against the sky, not perfectly round, not angular either, somewhere in between, like it didn't fit a clear category. And it wasn't moving. Completely still. I squinted, trying to get a better look. The edges seemed slightly off, like the air around it was distorting the outline. The antenna vibrated again in my hand, a little stronger this time. I looked back down at it. The metal rods were trembling slightly, just enough to catch the light. There was still no wind. I could feel my heartbeat picking up, not from panic exactly, just from trying to process what I was seeing. I looked back up at the shape. It hadn't moved, but it felt closer. Not because it had shifted position, I hadn't seen it move, but because the space between it and everything else felt compressed, like it didn't belong at that distance. The vibration in the antenna deepened. I could feel it through my fingers, up my arm, a low, steady hum. The air around me felt heavier. My ears popped. I swallowed, but the pressure stayed. The sound from the TV inside the house cut out completely. No static, nothing, just silence. I froze. The shape above seemed to sharpen for a second. Not clearer, just more present. I had the feeling, stronger than anything else, that it was aware of me. Not looking exactly, but aware. The antenna jerked slightly in my hand, not enough to pull free, but enough that I tightened my grip instinctively. The vibrations spiked, then steadied again. My chest felt tight. Breathing took more effort. I wanted to climb down. That thought kept repeating, but I didn't move right away. I was stuck there, one hand on the antenna, looking up at something that didn't make sense. Then the hum stopped. Instantly. The antenna went still. The pressure in my ears eased. The shape was gone. No movement away, no fade, just gone. The sky looked empty again. Normal. The distant sound of traffic came back, faint but real. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch up with what had just happened. Then I climbed down, faster than I went up. My hands slipped once on the ladder, but I caught myself and kept going. When I got back inside, the house felt normal again. Warm, familiar. I went straight to the living room. The TV was on, but it wasn't showing anything. Just static. Not the usual kind either. It was flat. Even. Like a blank field of gray noise without variation. I picked up the remote and flipped through the channels. Every single one was the same, no signal. I checked the cables, the box, everything. Nothing changed. I turned the TV off, then back on. Still static. I stood there for a while, staring at it. Then I noticed the time. The clock on the wall said 8:12. I frowned. I'd gone up on the roof just before 7:30. It hadn't felt like 40 minutes, more like 10, maybe 15. I went back outside and looked up at the roof. Everything looked the same. The antenna was still angled slightly off, exactly where I'd left it. I didn't go back up. That night, the TV never came back. It stayed on that same flat static until I turned it off before bed. The next morning, it was working again, like nothing had happened. Clear picture, normal channels. I haven't been back on the roof since. The antenna's still slightly crooked. I live on the 4th floor of a concrete apartment block in Sheffield. It's one of those older buildings with narrow stairwells, no lift, and those small rectangular windows between floors that barely let in any light during the day. At night, they're usually just black. That evening was normal. I'd been out picking up food and got back around 11:40. Ate in the kitchen, watched something for a bit, then realized I'd left my water bottle in the car. I didn't feel like going all the way down, but I also knew I'd forget it by morning. So I grabbed my keys and stepped out into the hallway. The building was quiet. No voices through the walls, no doors opening or closing. Just that faint, constant hum you don't notice until it's gone, the electricity running through everything. Lights in the corridor were dim but steady. I pushed open the stairwell door and started down. The stairwell always smells the same: dust, damp concrete, a bit of metal. The overhead lights are spaced out, so you get these pockets of shadow between them. I walked down from the 4th to the 3rd without really thinking about it, just counting the steps out of habit. That's when I noticed the light. It was coming through the window between the 3rd and 2nd floors. At first, I thought it was just a car pulling into the lot outside, headlights hitting at the right angle. But this was brighter and steady. Not yellow like streetlights, not warm like headlights, white, pale, almost bluish. It filled the entire stairwell between those two flights, spilling up the walls and onto the steps. It didn't flicker or shift. It just sat there, constant. I slowed down. The hum of the building was still there at that point, faint but present. I took another step down, then it stopped. Not faded, not dipped, stopped. The hum, the background noise, even the slight buzz from the overhead light above me, gone. The silence was immediate and heavy, like someone had closed a door on sound itself. I froze halfway between steps. The light didn't change. It stayed just as bright, filling the space below me. But without the hum, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong to the building. I looked down toward the next landing. The window was glowing so brightly I couldn't see anything beyond it. Just a flat, even light, like a sheet. I remember thinking I should turn around, just go back up, forget the water bottle. But I didn't move. Something about the stillness held me there. I took another step down. The air felt different. Not warmer or colder, just thicker. Like moving through it took a bit more effort than it should have. My ears popped, sharp, sudden. I winced and swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed, sitting just behind my eyes. I gripped the handrail. The metal felt slightly off under my fingers. Not vibrating, not cold. Just less solid somehow. I looked at the wall. For a second, I thought it was moving. Not the whole thing, just the surface. Like a faint ripple passing through it, the way heat distorts the air above pavement. Then it settled again. The light pulsed, not a flicker. A slow, subtle brightening, then dimming, like breathing. I felt it in my chest more than I saw it. A slight shift, in and out. I opened my mouth to say something, just to break the silence, but no sound came out at first. Then when it did, it sounded flat, like it wasn't carrying properly. I took another step down. The light filled my vision more now. The edges of the stairwell faded, everything soft and slightly blurred. The pressure in my ears increased. My fingers tingled where they held the rail. The light pulsed again. And then the hum came back. All at once, the overhead light buzzed. I heard a distant door slam somewhere in the building. Pipes rattled faintly in the walls. I blinked. The light was gone. The window between floors was dark again, just reflecting the faint glow from the stairwell lights. I looked around. Everything was normal. I was standing on a landing, not the third, the second. I stopped breathing for a second. I looked up. The flight of stairs above me led to the third floor. I could see the door there, closed like it always was. I looked down. Another flight led to the first. I stood there trying to piece together how I'd gotten there. I didn't remember walking down that last flight. I remembered stopping on the third, seeing the light, stepping down toward it. But I didn't remember reaching the landing below. I checked my phone, 12:19. I frowned. I'd left my flat at 11:52. There was no way I'd been in the stairwell for over 20 minutes. It hadn't felt like that. It had felt like a few minutes, maybe less. I stood there for a while, just listening to the normal sounds of the building. Someone's TV through a wall, the faint hum back in place. Everything felt ordinary again. Eventually, I went the rest of the way down, grabbed my water bottle from the car, and came back up. When I passed the window between the third and second floors again, I stopped. Looked at it. Nothing. Just black glass, faintly reflecting the stairwell. I went back to my flat and locked the door. Didn't turn any lights off for a while. Since then, I've noticed something. Sometimes, when I'm going down those stairs late at night, the hum will drop for just a second. Not completely, just enough that I notice it. And I always look toward that window, just in case the light comes back. I cut through the park most nights after work. It shaved about 10 minutes off the walk home, and after a while you just get used to how it feels in the dark. It wasn't a big park, just a stretch of grass, a footpath running through it, a small playground off to one side, and a few benches scattered around. That night, it was colder than usual, one of those dry, still nights where the air feels sharp but there's no wind. My shift ended late, just after 11:30, and by the time I got to the park, it was close to midnight. The streetlights along the path were spaced far enough apart that there were patches of darkness between them. You could still see, but only just. The playground sat in one of those darker sections, tucked slightly off the path behind a couple of low trees. I had my phone in my pocket, playing music, low enough that I could still hear what was going on around me. Gravel crunching under my shoes, distant traffic from the main road, that kind of thing. Nothing felt unusual at first. I passed the first bench, the one with the chipped green paint, then the curve in the path where the playground starts to come into view on the right. That's when I noticed the glow. It wasn't bright, more like a soft, pale light sitting over the playground, just enough to outline the swings and the frame. It didn't spill far beyond that area. The grass around it was still dark. I slowed down a bit. At first, I thought it was someone there with a phone or a torch, maybe sitting on one of the swings, but there was no movement that looked like a person. The light was even, flat. I pulled one earbud out so I could hear better. That's when I noticed the silence. The traffic noise was still there, but muted, like it had been pushed further away. The usual rustling of trees or the faint hum you get at night just wasn't there. I stopped walking. The swings were moving. Not much, just a slow, steady sway back and forth. There was no wind. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out if maybe I just couldn't feel it. Sometimes you get a breeze that only catches certain things, but the trees weren't moving. The grass wasn't shifting, only the swings, back and forth, back and forth. The glow didn't change, it just sat there, holding everything in place. I took a step off the path, then another. I don't know why. Curiosity, I guess, trying to make sense of it. As I got closer, the air felt different. Not colder, not warmer, heavier, like it had more weight to it. Breathing felt slightly off, like I had to put a bit more effort into it. My ears popped. I stopped again, halfway between the path and the playground. The swings kept moving. The chains made a faint sound, but it didn't carry properly, like it was being dampened. I looked around. No one else was there. No footsteps, no voices, no movement anywhere else in the park. Just that one area, lit up and quiet. I took another step closer. The glow seemed thicker now, like it had depth to it. Not just light, but something you were looking into. For a second, I thought I saw something behind the swings. Not a person. Just a darker patch within the light, like a shape that didn't fully separate from it. I blinked. It was gone. The swings slowed slightly, then picked back up into that same steady rhythm. My chest felt tight, not panic, just pressure. I realized I'd stopped hearing my music completely. I checked my phone, still playing, volume the same, but I couldn't hear it. Everything felt like it had been turned down or pushed away. The glow pulsed, subtle but enough to notice, brightened slightly, then dimmed. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I took a step back, then another. The moment I moved away, the pressure eased just a little. The sound came back first. Faint, but there. The swings kept moving. The glow stayed steady. I turned and walked back to the path, faster this time. I didn't run, but I didn't look back right away either. When I reached the path, I stopped and turned. The playground was dark. No glow. The swings were still. Everything looked normal. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to match what I'd just seen with what was in front of me. It didn't line up. I checked my phone. 12:47. I frowned. I'd entered the park at around 12:05. There was no way I'd been standing there for over 40 minutes. It hadn't felt like that. It had felt like maybe 5-10 minutes at most. I started walking again, a bit quicker now. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see the glow come back. It didn't. When I got home, I dropped my keys on the counter and sat down on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed with a notification, a fitness app. It logs steps automatically. I opened it without really thinking. There was a gap. From 12:09 to 12:44, no steps recorded, just a flat line, like I hadn't moved at all during that time. But I had. I knew I had. I'd walked into the park, walked toward the playground, walked back out, except the app didn't show any of it. I stood there for a while, phone still in my hand. Then I went to the window and looked out toward the park. You couldn't see the playground from my place, just the tops of the trees and the faint glow of the path lights. Everything looked normal. But now when I take that road at night, I don't cut through the middle anymore. I stick to the edge. And I don't look at the swings if I can help it. The power went out just after 1:50 in the morning. I know that because I'd been awake, lying on the couch with the TV on low, half watching something and half dozing. The screen cut to black mid-sentence, and the room went completely still. No hum from the fridge, no low buzz from the electronics, just silence. I sat up, waiting for it to flicker back on. Sometimes it does that, just a quick drop, then everything returns. But this time, it stayed off. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and turned on the flashlight. Battery was fine. Signal too. I walked into the kitchen and checked the breaker out of habit. Nothing had tripped. It felt strange right away. Not just the darkness, but the kind of quiet that comes with a full outage. The kind where you realize how much background noise you're used to without thinking about it. I went to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. The whole street was dark. No porch lights, no street lamps, just the faint gray of the sky and the silhouettes of houses. I could see the outlines of parked cars and the shape of Mrs. Denton's tree across the road. Then I noticed the house at the end of the street. It was lit, not from inside, from above. A steady white glow, like a soft floodlight shining straight down onto the roof and front garden. It covered the whole property evenly. House, driveway, hedges, but it didn't spill over much into the street. The edges of it were contained, I guess, like it knew exactly where to stop. I frowned and leaned closer to the glass. Every other house was dark, total blackout. But that one, Graham and Lisa's place, looked like it was sitting under its own private daylight. I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cold, still, no wind, no distant traffic, just that same heavy quiet. The light on their house didn't flicker or move. It just stayed there, constant. Not bright enough to hurt your eyes, but bright enough that you could see details, individual leaves on the hedge, the texture of the brick. I waited for someone else to come outside. A neighbor checking their fuse box, maybe, but no one did. I even glanced at the house next door to them. Completely dark. No sign that anyone had noticed anything unusual. I stepped off my porch and walked a few paces down the street. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. Not because of the light itself, but because of how quiet everything was around it. The usual night sounds, distant cars, a dog barking somewhere were just gone. Even my footsteps sounded dull, like they were being absorbed. I stopped about halfway between my house and theirs. The glow didn't change. No shadows moving, no visible source above. I looked up, expecting to see something, maybe a drone or a helicopter with a spotlight. There was nothing. just the sky, dark, empty. But the light was clearly coming from above. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, like when you go up a hill quickly. Not painful, just noticeable. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't go away right away. I stood there longer than I probably should have. At one point, I thought I saw something shift at the top edge of the light, like the air was bending slightly. Not a shape, just a distortion, like heat rising off a road in summer. Then it settled again. I didn't get any closer. Something about the way the light just sat there made me feel like I shouldn't. After a minute or two, I turned back and walked to my house. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting it to disappear the moment I stopped watching. But it stayed. I went back inside and stood by the window for a while, watching it from there. I don't know how long, maybe 10 minutes. Then, without warning, everything came back. The power, the hum of the fridge, the click of the boiler kicking in, streetlights flickering back to life, and the glow at the end of the street was gone. Just like that. No fade, no movement, just gone. Graham's house looked like every other house again, dark except for the porch light that flicked on with the rest. I checked the time on the microwave, 2:02 a.m. I went to bed after that, but I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that steady white light sitting over their house like it belonged there. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Sun out, people heading to work, cars moving. I saw Graham out front around 9:30, sweeping leaves off his driveway. I walked over, trying to sound casual. "Power cut last night, yeah?" He nodded. "Yeah, weird one. Everything just died." "Come back quick, though," I said. He shrugged. "Must have been about 10 minutes or so. All my stuff reset." "All of it?" "Yeah," he said. "Microwave, oven, even the thermostat. Clocks all blinking when I woke up." I hesitated for a second. "What time was it?" He leaned on the broom, thinking. "About 2, I think. Checked the phone after. Said 2:03 when everything kicked back in." I nodded, like that made sense. I didn't mention the light. I didn't ask if he'd seen anything. He went back to sweeping. I stood there for a moment longer, looking up at his roof. Nothing there. Just morning light. But now, every time the power flickers, even for a second, I check the end of the street first. I rented the cabin for 3 nights in early May, up near a place called Lake Vermilion in northern Minnesota. It wasn't one of those busy tourist spots. This was further out down a dirt track that wound through trees for about 15 minutes before you even saw the water. The cabin itself was small. 1 room, a little kitchenette, a wood stove, and a bed pushed up against the wall facing a big window that looked out over the lake. No Wi-Fi, barely any signal, just trees and water. The first day was normal. I got there mid-afternoon, unpacked, walked the shoreline a bit. The lake was calm but not still. You could see ripples, hear the occasional splash from fish or something moving below the surface, loons calling out now and then, wind in the trees, everything you'd expect. That night, it got cold fast. I lit the stove, made something simple to eat, and went to bed around 10:30. The sky was clear. I remember that because the stars were bright through the window before I pulled the curtain halfway across. I didn't close it completely. I like being able to see outside a little when I wake up. I fell asleep pretty easily. I woke up at some point in the night because the room was lit, not brightly, just enough that I noticed it through my eyelids before I even opened my eyes. A soft, pale glow, not warm like firelight, not yellow like a bulb, more white, maybe slightly blue. I rolled onto my back and looked toward the window. The curtain was still half drawn, but light was coming through the uncovered part, filling the cabin in that same dim, even way. It wasn't flickering, it didn't move, just steady. My first thought was moonlight, but it didn't feel like moonlight. Too consistent, too present. I pushed myself up on my elbows and looked directly out. The lake was glowing. Not bright, but clearly visible. The surface looked smooth, like glass. No ripples at all, no movement. And it wasn't reflecting anything. No stars, no trees, no sky. Just a flat, pale surface, like it had its own light coming from within it. I sat there for a while, trying to understand what I was seeing. The shoreline was still there, dark outlines of trees framing the water. But the water itself didn't behave like water. It didn't catch the light from the sky. It didn't distort or shimmer. It just was, still and blank. I got out of bed slowly and walked closer to the window. The wooden floor creaked under my feet, louder than it should have been in that quiet. That's when I noticed the sound, or the lack of it. No wind, no insects, no water against the shore. Even the usual background noise you don't think about was gone. It felt like the whole place had been sealed off. I stood there, a few feet from the glass, staring out. The glow didn't change. The lake didn't move. I reached out and touched the window. The glass felt slightly warmer than I expected, like it had been sitting in sunlight, even though it was the middle of the night. Then something shifted. Not in the trees, not in the sky, in the water. For a second, I thought I saw a darker shape just beneath the surface, not breaking it, not rising, just there, like something large moving slowly underneath a layer that didn't ripple. I leaned closer, squinting. The shape didn't resolve into anything I could understand. It just passed, like a shadow crossing behind frosted glass. The glow pulsed once, soft, subtle, like a slow breath. I felt a pressure in my ears, sudden and sharp. I swallowed, but it didn't clear right away. The air in the cabin felt thicker, harder to breathe. I stepped back instinctively. The glow dimmed slightly, then returned to its original level. I don't remember deciding to lie back down. I don't remember closing my eyes. The next thing I knew, sunlight was coming through the window. Real sunlight. Warm, yellow, hitting the floor in a sharp rectangle. I was in bed on my side, facing away from the window. The room looked completely normal. I sat up quickly and turned. The lake was moving again. Small ripples. Light breeze. Reflections of trees and sky shifting on the surface like they should. I got up and went to the window. Nothing unusual. No glow. No stillness. Just water. I stood there for a while, trying to convince myself it had been a dream. It felt like one, except for how clear it had been, how quiet. I went back to the bed and picked up my watch from the small table next to it. It was still running, but the date was wrong. It showed May 14th. It should have been May 12th. I checked my phone. May 12th, 8:06 a.m. I stared at the watch for a while, waiting for it to correct itself somehow. It didn't. The time was right. The seconds ticked forward normally. Just the date was off, 2 days ahead. I reset it. Then I set it down and went outside. The air felt normal, cool, fresh. I could hear birds again. Water lapping lightly at the shore. I walked down to the edge of the lake and looked out over it. Nothing strange, no stillness, no glow, just water. But I stayed there longer than I meant to, watching it, waiting for it to go flat again. It didn't. I didn't sleep much the next night. I kept the curtain closed. I was driving back from my sister's place just outside Hereford, heading toward a village called Weobley, where I rent a small cottage. It was just after 11 p.m., late October. One of those damp nights where the road stays slick even though it hasn't rained in hours. The hedgerows were thick on both sides, closing the road in so tight it felt like a tunnel in places. I'd taken that route plenty of times. It's a narrow B-road, no streetlights, just reflectors and the occasional farmhouse set back behind gates. My headlights cut a clean path ahead, and everything beyond that dropped into black. I wasn't tired. I remember that clearly. Radio on low, heater humming, just focused on the bends in the road. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed the light. It was ahead, maybe 50 yards, just above the hedgerow on the left side. At first, I thought it was someone's porch light or a car coming up a driveway. But it was too high for that, and it wasn't moving. It hovered there, level with the top of the hedge, maybe 10 or 12 feet off the ground. White, but not harsh. Soft, almost like it had no edges. I slowed down instinctively. The road there narrows even more, barely enough space for 2 cars to pass. I figured maybe someone had stopped on the other side, and the light was reflecting weirdly off something. But there were no headlights. No engine noise, no sign of another vehicle, just that light. I eased off the accelerator and let the car roll forward slowly. The beam from my headlights didn't seem to affect it at all. It didn't flare or dim. It just stayed constant, like it wasn't interacting with the rest of the world properly. Then I noticed the air. It felt heavy. Not like humidity, more like pressure. Like the inside of the car had thickened slightly. I swallowed and my ears popped faintly. The same feeling you get going up a hill too fast, except the road was flat. I rolled my shoulders, adjusted my grip on the wheel. The light hadn't moved. still hovering above the hedge, dead still, as if it was waiting for something. I slowed even more, almost to a crawl now. There was a part of me that wanted to turn around, just reverse and take the longer route home. But the road was too narrow, and I didn't like the idea of backing up blind in the dark, so I kept going. As I got closer, maybe within 30 yards, the pressure increased. My ears popped again, sharper this time. There was a slight ringing underneath it, low and steady, not loud enough to be a sound, more like a sensation. The steering wheel felt different in my hands, not heavier exactly, just less responsive, like there was a delay between what I was doing and what the car was doing. I glanced down at the dashboard. Everything looked normal. Speed dropping, fuel steady, no warning lights. When I looked back up, the light seemed closer. Not because it had moved, but because I had. Except I didn't remember covering the distance between where I'd been and where I was now. It was just nearer. Hovering directly over the hedge line, maybe 20 feet ahead. I could see more detail now. Not a shape, not really. But the air around it looked warped, like heat rising off asphalt, except it was cold out. The hedge beneath it was barely moving, even though there should have been at least some breeze. I slowed to almost a stop. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough that I winced. I tried to swallow again, but it didn't help. My hands tingled slightly on the wheel. The ringing deepened. I remember thinking I should stop the car. Just pull over, figure out what I was looking at. I eased my foot toward the brake. And then, nothing. The next thing I knew, I was stopped. Engine idling, hazard lights off, headlights still on. The road ahead was empty. No light, no distortion, just the hedgerow, dark and still. I was pulled slightly onto the verge, the left tires on damp grass, the right still on the tarmac. Not fully off the road, but enough that I must have steered deliberately. I sat there, hands still on the wheel, trying to piece together what had just happened. The engine sounded normal, the heater was still blowing warm air, the radio had switched to static. I turned it off. Silence filled the car, but it was normal silence now. Not that thick, pressurized quiet from before. I checked the time on the dashboard. 12:07. I stared at it for a second. I'd seen the light maybe 10 minutes after leaving my sister's place. The drive should have taken another 15 after that. There was no way I should have been there at 12:07. I reached for my phone. No signal. Battery fine. Clock matched the car. I sat there for a while, maybe a minute or two, just looking down the road. Nothing moved. Eventually, I pulled back onto the road and drove the rest of the way home. I kept expecting something else to happen. Another light, that same pressure in my ears, but the rest of the drive was normal. When I got home, I sat in the car for a bit longer before going inside. The engine ticked as it cooled. The night air felt lighter than it had on the road. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. The next day, I drove back down that same stretch in daylight. There was nothing there, just the hedgerow, thick and overgrown. No gaps, no driveways, no signs of anything that could have produced that kind of light. I even stopped the car and got out, stood right where I thought I'd seen it. The air felt normal, no pressure, no ringing. But I kept looking at the top of the hedge, trying to picture where the light had been. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just lost time. I'd been... Pause just for a while. I live in a small upstairs flat in a converted terrace house in Leeds. The bedrooms narrow just enough space for a double bed, a wardrobe, and a dresser with a mirror mounted above it. The mirror's fixed into the wall with 2 brackets. I remember helping my landlord put it up when I first moved in because it needed drilling into the brick. That night wasn't anything unusual. It was mid-January, cold and damp, the kind of cold that seeps into the walls. I'd gone to bed around midnight after watching some TV in the living room. No noise outside, just the occasional car passing and the wind brushing along the gutter. I woke up at some point in the night, but I don't know why. No dream that I can remember, no sound that stood out. Just one of those sudden wake-ups where your eyes open and you're fully aware straight away. The room was dark, but not completely. There's a streetlight outside that bleeds in around the curtains, so you can usually make out shapes, the edge of the wardrobe, the outline of the door, the dresser across from the bed. I was lying on my side facing the wall. The mirror was behind me, mounted above the dresser. I remember thinking about rolling over, but I didn't right away. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just different. Then I noticed it in the mirror. A glow, soft, dim, behind me. At first I thought it was a car passing, maybe headlights hitting the room at an angle. But it didn't move like headlights. It didn't sweep across the wall or fade quickly. It just stayed. I rolled onto my back slowly and looked straight at the mirror. The glow was there, centered behind where my head had been. It wasn't bright enough to light up the whole room, just enough to show a faint circle on the wall behind the bed. Pale, almost white with a slight blue tint. The edges were soft, like it wasn't coming from a solid source. I pushed myself up a little on my elbows, trying to see what could be causing it. There was nothing there. No lamp, no phone light, no gaps in the curtains that could have let something in from outside. Just the wall and the headboard. But in the mirror, the light was clear, and it was pulsing. Not flashing, not flickering, breathing. That's the only way I can describe it. It would brighten slightly, hold for a second, then dim again. Slow. Steady, like something inhaling and exhaling behind me. I stayed very still. I didn't feel scared right away, more confused than anything. I kept trying to match what I was seeing in the mirror with something in the room, but it didn't line up. I reached back with one hand just behind my head, expecting to feel something, heat maybe. There was nothing, just the wall. The glow in the mirror pulsed again. That's when I noticed the silence. I hadn't heard it before because I'd just woken up, but it stood out now. No wind, no distant cars, no creaking from the building. Even the usual faint ringing in my ears felt muted. I sat up fully, back against the headboard, staring at the mirror. The pulsing continued, and then I felt it. A pressure in my ears, like when you're going up in a lift too fast. It wasn't painful, just uncomfortable. I swallowed, tried to clear it. It didn't go away. My chest felt tight, like the air in the room had thickened. I remember thinking I should turn on the light. Just reach over, hit the switch, see what was actually there. But I didn't move. It wasn't like I couldn't. I just didn't. The glow brightened slightly on the next pulse. For a second, I thought I could see something in it. Not a shape, not clearly, just a distortion, like heat rising off pavement. It hovered in the same spot behind me, visible only in the reflection. I blinked. The light dimmed again. My ears popped once, sharply this time, and the pressure shifted. The silence deepened, like everything had been pushed further away. I tried to speak, just to say something out loud, but my voice didn't come out right. It sounded flat, like it didn't belong in the room. The pulsing slowed. Bright. Dim. Bright. Each time it brightened, the reflection seemed to push forward slightly, like it was getting closer without actually moving. I don't remember closing my eyes. I don't remember lying back down. The next thing I knew, my alarm was going off. 7:15 a.m. The room was normal, light coming through the curtains, sounds from the street outside, my phone vibrating on the bedside table. I sat up quickly and looked at the mirror. No glow, just my reflection, tired and a bit pale. I got out of bed and walked over to the dresser. Something felt off, but I couldn't place it right away. Then I noticed the mirror. It was tilted, not by much, maybe a few degrees to the left, but enough that the reflection of the door frame didn't line up the way it had before. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember how it had looked the night before. It had been straight. I was sure of it. I touched the frame. It didn't feel loose. The brackets were still tight against the wall. It shouldn't have shifted at all. I tried to adjust it back, but it resisted slightly, firm, like it had settled into the new position overnight. I stepped back and looked at it again. Everything else in the room was exactly where it should be, but the mirror wasn't. I didn't find anything else out of place. No marks on the wall, no sign of anything behind the bed, nothing to explain the glow or the pressure or the silence. I went to work like normal that day. Tried not to think about it too much. But now, every night before I go to sleep, I check the mirror, make sure it's still straight, and sometimes when I wake up in the dark for no reason, I don't turn around straight away. I just look at the reflection first. I work the late shift at a warehouse outside of Tulsa, the kind that sits by itself off a service road with nothing around but chain link fence and flat land. We closed at 11, but it usually took another half hour to finish up. Locking bays, logging inventory, shutting down the forklifts. That night I clocked out at 11:28. I remember because I checked my phone right after signing the sheet. It was cold out. Not freezing, but enough that your breath showed up in the parking lot lights. The place only had 3 tall poles lighting the whole lot, and they left long stretches in shadow. My car was parked near the far end, maybe 6 or 7 spaces away from the closest light. There were only 2 other cars left. One belonged to Ron, who usually stayed late doing paperwork, and the other was this beat-up sedan that hadn't moved in a few days. Everything else was empty. I stepped outside, zipped my jacket, and started walking across the lot. Gravel crunched under my boots. No wind, no traffic noise, just the hum from the building behind me. About halfway to my car, I noticed the light. At first, I thought one of the overhead lamps had shifted or flickered, but this wasn't coming from above the poles. It was focused, like a cone, shining straight down onto one parking space a few spots to the right of my car. It wasn't harsh like a spotlight, more like a soft, pale beam, maybe a little bluish. The edges weren't sharp, it kind of faded into the dark around it. The space it covered was about the size of a car, maybe a little wider. And inside it, things were moving. Dust, small bits of debris, leaves, maybe. Except they weren't falling, they were drifting upward, slowly like they were being pulled. Not spinning, not blown around, just rising, straight up through the light, like gravity had flipped inside that one spot. I stopped walking. I remember just standing there with my hands in my pockets, trying to figure out what I was looking at. My brain kept trying to explain it, maybe heat from the pavement, maybe wind I couldn't feel. But there was no breeze. Nothing else in the lot was moving, not even the loose plastic bag caught under the fence. The beam didn't make a sound, no hum, no buzz. Just that quiet glow and the steady upward drift of whatever was caught in it. I took a step closer. Not fast. Just one step. The air felt off. Not colder, not warmer. Just denser, like I'd walked into a room with less oxygen. My ears popped slightly. Not painful, just enough to notice. I stopped again. The dust kept rising. I remember focusing on one small piece of something. Looked like a torn bit of paper, and watching it lift inch by inch until it disappeared near the top of the light. Then I blinked, and it was gone. Not fading, not shutting off, just gone. The parking space was dark again, empty. No beam, no movement, just the same cracked asphalt and faint oil stains as the rest of the lot. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The hum from the building behind me seemed louder now, like it had been turned back on. I became aware of my own breathing again, a little faster than it should have been. I walked to my car. The door felt colder than usual when I grabbed the handle. I got in, shut the door, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Everything looked normal. The dashboard lit up, radio came on low, heater started blowing warm air. Then I noticed the time, 12:41. I frowned and looked at my phone. Same time. That didn't make sense. I'd left the building at 11:28. Even if I'd stood there for a few minutes, there was no way it had been over an hour. I tried to replay it in my head, clocking out, walking across the lot, seeing the light. Stopping, blinking. That was it. There wasn't any gap I could feel, no moment where things went blank. It all felt continuous, but the time didn't match. I sat there in the car a little longer, engine idling, staring at the empty parking space through the windshield. It looked completely normal, nothing to suggest anything had been there. Eventually, I put the car in drive and pulled out. The road home was quiet. No traffic, no stops. I kept checking the clock like it might jump again, but it stayed steady this time, minutes ticking by like they should. When I got home, I turned off the car and just sat there for a second, hands still on the wheel. I checked the dashboard clock again, 12:59. Then I looked at the microwave through the kitchen window, 11:58. I went inside and checked everything. The oven clock said 11:57. The wall clock in the living room said 11:56. Only my car and my phone were ahead, exactly 1 hour. I reset the clocks in the house without thinking about it too much. Then I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the microwave as it blinked back to life. The next day, I got to work early and walked out to the same spot in the lot. Looked at the exact parking space where the light had been. Nothing. No marks. No burn. No sign of anything unusual. I even crouched down and touched the asphalt. It felt like every other part of the lot. Cold, rough, normal. Ron came out a few minutes later and asked what I was doing. I just said I thought I dropped something. I haven't seen the light again. But sometimes when I'm leaving late and the lot's empty, I catch myself looking at that spot, just to make sure nothing's rising out of it. It was just after 11:30 when I got to the station. Not a big one, just a single platform on the edge of town, concrete slab, one glass shelter, and a ticket machine that only worked half the time. The line ran through a stretch of open fields before curving toward the city, so once you stepped out there at night, it felt more isolated than it actually was. I'd taken that train plenty of times. Last one of the night was scheduled for 11:47. If you missed it, you were stuck until morning. No buses, no taxis unless you booked ahead, which I hadn't. The platform was empty when I got there. No surprise, it usually was that late. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting that dull yellow glow that never quite reaches the ground evenly. I sat down on the metal bench inside the shelter, pulled my jacket tighter, and checked my phone. 11:34. Cold, but not freezing. There was a thin layer of fog sitting low over the tracks, drifting in slow, uneven patches. You could see the rails disappear into it about 50 yards out. I remember noticing how quiet it was. No wind, no cars from the nearby road, not even insects, just that faint electrical hum from the lights overhead. I stood up after a few minutes and walked closer to the edge of the platform, hands in my pockets, just staring down the tracks, waiting for that distant glow you usually see before the train rounds the bend. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was the train. It was in the right direction, low and centered over the tracks, but it didn't move. It just hovered there, maybe 30 or 40 feet beyond where the fog thickened. Soft white, not bright like a headlight, more like a diffused glow, like a bulb wrapped in frosted glass. No beam, no glare. I leaned forward a little, squinting, trying to make out a shape behind it. There wasn't one, just the light. I checked my phone again. 11:39, still a few minutes early. I figured maybe the train had stopped further down the line for some reason, or there was another train on the track, but there should have been sound. You can hear those things long before you see them. The rails hum. The ground vibrates a little. There was nothing. I stepped closer to the edge of the platform, like maybe a foot or two from the drop to the tracks. The fog shifted slightly, and the light seemed to sharpen for a second, like it was coming into focus. That's when the silence changed. It didn't get quieter. It just cut, like someone had flipped a switch on the world. The hum from the overhead lights vanished. The faint ringing in my ears, gone. Even my own breathing sounded muffled, like I had cotton in my ears. I blinked a few times, swallowed, tried to clear my ears. Nothing changed. The light hadn't moved. It felt closer now, not physically, but in a way I can't really explain, like it was pressing into the space between me and it. I had this sudden, stupid thought that I shouldn't be standing that close to the edge. I took a step back. The moment I did, I felt something in my arms, a low, buzzing sensation, starting at my wrists and moving up toward my elbows. Not painful, just there. Like holding onto something vibrating, except I wasn't holding anything. I looked down at my hands. They looked normal, no shaking, no discoloration. When I looked back up, the light was still there, same size, same position. I tried to take a step back again, but my legs didn't move right away. Not frozen, just slow to respond, like there was a delay between thinking and doing. The buzzing in my arms got a little stronger. I remember thinking I should say something. Call out, ask if someone was there, but the idea of making noise felt wrong, like it didn't belong in that moment. Then, sound came back, not gradually, all at once. The overhead lights buzzed again. The distant hum of the town came back. I heard my own breath, sharp and uneven, and the train was already there, right in front of me. The doors were closing. I jumped back instinctively as it pulled away from the platform, metal wheels screeching lightly against the rails. It was moving slow at first, then picking up speed as it passed me, carriage after carriage sliding by. I stood there, confused, trying to piece it together. I hadn't heard it arrive. I hadn't seen it approach. I hadn't seen anyone get on or off. I checked my phone, 12:21. I just stared at it for a second, waiting for it to change, like it was glitching. It didn't. I went into the call history, the messages, anything that might show I'd been distracted. Nothing. No missed calls, no notifications. The screen time showed no activity for the last 40 minutes. I looked back down the tracks. The light was gone. The fog had thinned out, drifting off to the sides. The rails stretched out empty into the distance. I stayed there for another 10 minutes, hoping maybe I just missed it somehow and another train would come. I knew it wouldn't. That was the last one. Eventually, I walked home, took the long way, sticking to the lit streets. When I got back, I checked the train schedule online. It showed the 11:47 departure marked as on time. No delays, no early arrival, just normal. The next night, I went back to the station around the same time. I told myself I just wanted to prove to myself it was nothing, that I'd zoned out, lost track of time. Everything was normal. Lights buzzing, distant cars. The train came in loud and obvious, headlights cutting through the dark long before it reached the platform. But I still stood a little further back from the edge, and I kept looking down the tracks, waiting for that soft white glow to show up again. I usually walk my dog around the same time every night, somewhere between 9:30 and 10. Her name's Marnie, medium-sized mutt, part collie, I think, smart enough to know the route better than I do. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Dayton. Rows of houses, small backyards, and just enough streetlights to keep things visible but still dark between them. That night was late November. Cold, but not snowing yet. The air had that dry bite to it, and you could see your breath if you looked for it. It had been cloudy earlier, but by the time I stepped outside, the sky had cleared up. No wind, no traffic, just that low hum you get from distant highways if you really listen. Marnie was already waiting by the door when I grabbed her leash. She always knew when it was time. I clipped it on, zipped up my jacket, and we stepped out. The first part of the walk was normal. We went down our street, turned left past the Simmons' house, the one with the always-on porch light, and headed toward the back loop. Marnie did her usual thing, stopping every few feet to sniff the same patches of grass like they were new. I checked my phone once as we turned the corner, 9:42. Everything felt routine. Quiet, but in a normal way. About 5 minutes later, as we passed a row of single-story houses with low roofs and bare trees out front, Marnie stopped walking. Not a pause, not a sniff and think. She just froze. Her ears went up, body stiff, leash pulling tight in my hand. I figured she'd spotted a cat or something, so I followed her line of sight. She wasn't looking at the ground. She was looking up. That's when I saw it. A pale light drifting above of the rooftops. It wasn't high, maybe just above the houses, gliding slowly from right to left. It didn't blink, no red or green like a plane, no sound at all, just a soft white glow moving steadily like it was following the line of the street. I squinted, trying to make out a shape. There wasn't one I could see, just the light itself, like a foggy bulb floating through the air. My first thought was drone, someone flying one of those quiet ones. But even those make a faint buzz, especially at night when everything else is still. This didn't. Marnie let out a low whine. I hadn't heard her make that sound before. Not like that. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion mixed with something urgent. She shifted her weight, paws scraping slightly on the pavement, but she didn't move forward or back. "Hey," I said, gently tugging the leash. "Come on." She didn't budge. Her eyes stayed locked on the light. I followed it again. It hadn't changed speed. Still gliding slowly, smooth, like it wasn't affected by anything around it. Then the air changed. I didn't notice it right away. It was more like something I felt before I realized it. The quiet got heavier. Not silent, just muted. Like someone had turned the volume down on everything at once. The distant highway hum was gone. Even my own footsteps sounded dull. I swallowed and felt my ears pop slightly. Not painful, just enough to notice, like when you go up a hill too fast. Marnie's whine got sharper. Then she pulled. Hard. Not toward the light, away from it. Back the way we'd come. The leash snapped tight, and she dug her paws in for a second, then yanked again, this time almost pulling me off balance. Okay, I said, more to myself than her. I turned with her, giving in, and she immediately started moving fast, almost a trot, then faster. Not running, but determined. Head low now, ears still back, glancing up only for a second before focusing straight ahead. I looked back once. The light was still there. Same height, same speed. It hadn't reacted to us at all. It just kept drifting above the houses like it had its own path. I kept walking. We didn't stop at any of the usual spots. Marnie didn't sniff anything, she didn't hesitate at corners. She just pulled steady and strong, straight back toward our street. The quiet stayed with us for a while. I could feel it more than hear it. That slight pressure in my ears, like the air wasn't moving the way it should. Then, maybe halfway back, everything returned. The highway hum faded in. A car passed somewhere a block away. A dog barked in the distance. The normal night sounds. Marnie slowed down a little, but she didn't relax. Not until we were almost at the house. I unlocked the door and she went straight inside without looking back. No circling, no hesitation, just in. I stepped in after her, shut the door, and leaned against it for a second. The house felt normal, warm, quiet in the usual way. I checked my phone, 10:38. I stared at it, thinking maybe I'd misread it before, but I remembered checking it at 9:42. That walk usually took 20, maybe 25 minutes if she was being slow. This had taken almost an hour. I tried to think back through it, leaving the house, turning left, seeing the light, Marnie freezing, walking back. There was no gap, no point where I felt like I'd lost time. It all felt continuous. But the clock didn't match. I went to the window and looked out toward the street. Nothing there, no light, just the same row of houses, porch lights on, shadows in between. Marnie was lying by the door, not sleeping, just watching it. I didn't walk her that late again for a while. Started going earlier, before it got fully dark. Every now and then, though, when I take her out at night, she'll stop and look up at the rooftops again. And I always follow her gaze. I caught the last bus out of town a little after midnight. It runs a reduced route that late, fewer stops, longer gaps between them. Usually it's just a handful of people, mostly shift workers or someone heading home from the station. That night there were 4 of us when I got on. The driver, obviously. A guy in a high-vis jacket, sitting halfway down on the left, asleep or close to it. A woman near the front with headphones in, staring out the window. And me. I took a seat on the right side, about 2 rows behind the middle door. I like being able to see out both sides without sitting too far forward. The bus pulled away on time. Everything felt normal. Low engine rumble, the occasional squeak from the suspension when we hit a bump, streetlights sliding past the windows in a steady rhythm. I checked my phone once, 12:18 a.m. I wasn't tired, just zoning out, watching reflections in the glass. You know how at night the inside of the bus shows up faintly in the window, layered over whatever's outside. We passed a couple of stops without anyone getting on or off. That wasn't unusual that late. It was maybe 10 minutes in when I first noticed the light. At first I thought it was just another car, a bright headlight catching up alongside us. But it didn't behave like one. It stayed level with my window, not slightly behind like a car pacing us, not pulling ahead, exactly level. I turned my head slightly to get a better look. It wasn't a headlight. There was no vehicle, just a bright white light hovering outside the bus, maybe a few feet away from the glass. Same height as the window, moving at the exact same speed, no flicker, no beam, just a solid glow. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for it to resolve into something, maybe a reflection, maybe something from inside the bus bouncing off the glass. But it didn't change. It stayed there, matching us. I leaned forward a bit, trying to see past it, to spot whatever was generating it. There was nothing behind it. No car, no bike, no anything. Just darkness and the faint outline of buildings further back. I glanced toward the front of the bus. The driver didn't react. Hands on the wheel, posture the same, eyes forward. No sign that he noticed anything unusual. I looked at the woman near the front. She hadn't moved. Still staring out her side, headphones on. I thought about getting up and asking if they could see it too, but I didn't. Something about the way the light just held its position made me not want to draw attention to it. The bus kept moving. The light kept pace. We passed another stop. Normally, even if no one's waiting, the bus slows slightly as it approaches. Just a habit, I guess. This time, it didn't. We went straight through. I checked my phone again. 12:29. That felt off. We should have hit at least 2 more stops by then, with a bit of slowing in between. I hadn't noticed any of that. I looked back at the light. Still there. Same distance from the window. Same brightness. I moved my hand toward the glass, slowly. The light didn't react. I stopped just short of touching the window. The air inside the bus felt different, not hot or cold, just thick, like it had more weight to it. My ears popped slightly, like going up in altitude. I swallowed, but it didn't clear right away. The engine noise seemed quieter, even though I could still feel the vibration through the floor. I looked down the aisle. The guy in the high-vis jacket hadn't moved. His head was tilted at the same angle, like time had paused for him. The woman at the front still hadn't shifted. Everything felt stretched, like the moments between seconds had gotten longer. I looked back at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending within the glow. Then I blinked, and the light was gone. Just gone. No fade, no movement away. It was there, and then it wasn't. The sound returned all at once. The engine got louder, the rattle of the bus over the road snapped back into place. I could hear distant traffic again. The driver adjusted his grip on the wheel slightly, like nothing had happened. We approached the next stop. This time the bus slowed. Pulled in properly, the doors hissed open. No one got on or off. I sat there, trying to figure out what had just happened. I checked my phone. 12:54. I stared at it for a second. There was no way that much time had passed. I tried to count back. When I first saw the light, maybe 12:20, 12:22 at the latest, it hadn't felt like half an hour. It had felt like a few minutes. I looked out the window again. The streets looked different. Not completely unfamiliar, but further along the route than I should have been. We'd passed at least 4 stops without slowing down. I hadn't felt the bus stop. I hadn't heard the doors open. Nothing. I leaned forward slightly and looked toward the front display. The stop name was one I recognized as being near the end of the line. I should have had another 20 minutes before getting there. The doors closed, the bus pulled away. Everything was normal again. The other passengers shifted slightly, like they'd come back into themselves. The guy in the high-vis jacket rubbed his eyes. The woman at the front adjusted her headphones. No one said anything. I didn't either. When my stop finally came, I got off and stood there for a second, watching the bus drive away. The street was quiet, normal quiet, no light, just the glow of the street lamps and the sound of the engine fading into the distance. I walked home without checking my phone again. I didn't want to see what time it said. I cut through the school lot because it was quicker than going around the block. It was a big open space, mostly empty at night, with a fence along the far side and a few scattered light poles that didn't do much except leave long gaps of darkness between them. That night it was just after midnight. I'd finished a late shift and didn't feel like taking the longer route home. It was dry, but cold, the kind of cold where the air feels thin and everything carries a little farther than usual. You could hear your own footsteps clearly on the asphalt. I stepped into the lot from the side entrance, hands in my pockets, head down slightly. At first, everything felt normal. The hum from the distant road, a faint rustle from somewhere near the trees beyond the fence, the occasional creak from the metal basketball hoop near the far corner. I walked about halfway across before I noticed the light. It was ahead of me, near the fence, not from a pole, not from any fixture I could see. It was a narrow beam, straight down from above like a column, maybe 3 or 4 feet wide, white but not harsh, contained. It lit up a small circle on the ground and nothing beyond it. I slowed down without meaning to. The beam didn't move, it just stayed there, fixed in place. I stopped walking. Inside the light, dust and leaves were drifting upward. Not falling, rising, slowly like they were being pulled toward something above. I stared at it, trying to figure out what I was looking at. There was no visible source. I looked up. Nothing above it. Just the dark sky. No helicopter, no drone, nothing. I took a few steps closer. The sound of my footsteps felt muted, like it wasn't echoing the way it should. I stopped again, maybe 10 or 15 feet from the edge of the light. The leaves inside it continued to lift off the ground, one at a time, drifting upward and disappearing as they reached the top of the beam. I watched one in particular. It lifted slowly, rotated slightly, then just faded out as it reached the upper edge. I blinked. The beam didn't change. The rest of the parking lot felt darker now. Not visually, just quieter. I realized I couldn't hear the distant road anymore. No cars, no wind, nothing, just silence. I shifted my weight. My ears popped. Suddenly, I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I took a breath. It felt heavier than it should have. Not difficult, just noticeable. I looked around the lot, still empty. No one else there. No movement beyond the beam. I looked back at it. For a second, I thought I saw something inside the light. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air wasn't sitting right. Then it smoothed out again. The leaves kept rising. The beam pulsed once, soft. The pressure in my chest increased slightly. I brought one hand out of my pocket and rubbed my fingers together. They tingled, faintly, like static. I took another step forward. The moment I did, the sound dropped even further. The silence deepened. It felt like everything had been turned off. Even my own breathing sounded distant. The beam didn't react to me. It stayed steady. The circle of light on the ground looked flat, too flat, like the texture of the asphalt had been pressed down. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to get closer or back away. My body felt slightly off. Not weak, just delayed. Like there was a fraction of a second between deciding to move and actually moving. The beam pulsed again, stronger this time. The pressure in my ears spiked. I winced. The leaves inside it lifted faster for a second, then returned to their slow drift. I took a step back. The pressure eased slightly. I took another step back. My hearing started to come back just a little, a faint hum in the distance. I looked down at the ground near my feet. It looked normal. Then I looked back at the beam. For a split second, I thought I saw something pass through it, not from below, from above, like a shadow crossing through the light. Then it was gone. The beam flickered once, and then it disappeared. Just like that. No fade, no dimming. Gone. The leaves that had been drifting upward dropped all at once, falling normally now, hitting the ground with soft, scattered sounds. And for a few seconds, everything was completely silent. Not just quiet, silent. No distant road, no wind, no ambient noise at all. I stood there, frozen, listening. Then the sound came back, all at once. Cars in the distance, a faint breeze, the creak of the basketball hoop again. I exhaled slowly. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. I looked at the spot where the beam had been. The asphalt looked slightly different, duller, like it had lost some of its texture, but it might have just been the angle. I took a step toward it. Everything felt normal again. No pressure, no heaviness, just cold air and the usual night sounds. I walked the rest of the way across the lot without stopping. When I reached the other side, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up. 1:18. I frowned. That didn't feel right. I was sure it hadn't been that late when I entered the lot. It hadn't felt like more than a couple minutes had passed. I kept walking, checking the time again a few steps later. 1:19. It moved forward normally, no glitches, no jumps, but there was a gap I couldn't account for. And when I looked back over my shoulder at the parking lot, everything looked completely normal. Dark, empty, like nothing had been there at all. I took that road home most nights because it cut through the industrial area and saved me a good 15 minutes. It was mostly empty after dark, just warehouses, a few fenced-off lots, and the substation near the bend where the road narrowed. You could always hear that place before you saw it. A constant electrical hum, low and steady, like something vibrating just under the surface of the air. Even with the windows up, it carried. That night it was late, around 1 a.m., maybe a little after. I remember checking the time at a red light just before turning onto that road. 1:07. It was cold and clear. No rain, no wind. The sky was open, a few stars visible between the glow from the city. I had the heater on low and the radio playing quietly. As I turned onto the road that led past the substation, I noticed something right away. It was too quiet. At first, I thought maybe I'd just turned the radio down too far. I reached over and adjusted the volume. The music got louder, but something was still off. The usual background hum from the substation wasn't there. I hadn't even reached it yet, but normally you could hear it from halfway down the road. I frowned and glanced ahead. The fence line came into view first, running along the right side of the road. Tall, chain link, topped with barbed wire. Behind it, the outlines of transformers and towers, all silhouetted against the faint ambient light. But it was dark in there, darker than usual. There were always a few security lights on, casting that dull yellow glow over the equipment. This time, I didn't see any. I slowed down slightly without really thinking about it. Then I saw the light. It was inside the fenced area, hovering above the ground maybe 10 or 15 feet up. Bright, white, but not harsh. It didn't spread out the way a floodlight would. It just sat there, contained like a sphere that didn't quite touch the surroundings. I eased off the accelerator. The closer I got, the clearer it became. It wasn't attached to anything. No pole, no structure, just suspended there above the equipment. And there was no sound. Not from the substation. Not from anything. The usual hum was completely gone. Even the faint noise from my engine seemed quieter. I rolled the window down a few inches. Cold air slipped in, but no sound. Just silence. I drove a little slower as I came alongside the fence. The light stayed steady. It didn't flicker, didn't move. It just hovered there, slightly above the tallest equipment inside. My headlights swept across the fence as I passed. For a second, I noticed the shadows. They didn't line up right. The light inside the fence cast long, thin shadows across the ground, but they didn't match the direction of my headlights or the road. They stretched at odd angles, like they were being pulled in different directions. I kept my eyes on it as I drove. The air felt different, heavier, like the space around the car had thickened. My ears popped, sharp. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't help. The pressure built slightly, not painful, just uncomfortable. The light pulsed once, soft. I felt it more than saw it. A slight shift in the air, like something pressing inward and then easing. My hands on the steering wheel tingled, faint, like static. I glanced down at the dashboard. The lights dimmed for a second. Not off, just lower. Then they flickered. Once, twice. The radio cut out. Silence filled the car. I pressed the accelerator lightly. The engine responded, but it felt muted, like the sound was being absorbed. I looked back up. The light seemed closer now. Even though I was moving past it, it stayed in my peripheral vision longer than it should have. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but something about it pulled my attention back. I glanced at it again. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside it. Not a shape I could follow, just a distortion, like the air was bending within the glow. Then it went back to looking solid. My ears popped again, harder this time. The pressure in my head increased. My chest felt tight, not like I couldn't breathe, just like the air was heavier. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. The headlights flickered again. This time, they dimmed noticeably. The road ahead faded slightly, like the beam had lost strength. I blinked. The light outside pulsed again, and the headlights dropped almost completely for a split second. The road disappeared, then came back. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The radio crackled and came back on, mid-song. The dashboard lights returned to normal brightness. I checked the rearview mirror. The substation was already behind me, but the glow was still visible for a second, hovering above the fence line. Then it vanished. No fade, just gone. I slowed down slightly, heart still beating faster than normal. The hum from the substation didn't come back, not even as I got further away. It stayed quiet, too quiet. I drove the rest of the way home without turning the radio up again, just listening. Everything else sounded normal. Cars in the distance, wind brushing against the car. But that stretch of road stayed different in my mind. When I got home, I parked and sat there for a minute. The engine idled steadily. I looked at the clock on the dashboard, 1:31. I frowned. That didn't seem right. The drive should have taken maybe 15 minutes from where I checked the time earlier, not over 20. I pulled out my phone, 1:31. Same time. I sat there trying to replay the drive in my head, turning onto the road, seeing the fence, the light, passing it, but there was a gap, a small one, just enough that I couldn't account for every second. I got out of the car and went inside. Everything in the house was normal, quiet, warm. I didn't think much more about it that night, but now, whenever I drive that road, I slow down before the substation, and sometimes before I even see it, I notice something missing. That hum, like the air is waiting for it to come back. I walked that path most nights because it was the only place nearby that felt quiet after work. It followed the river for a couple miles with a low metal rail between the path and the water. On the other side, trees and a few benches spaced out every so often. Nothing fancy, just enough light from the street lamps to see where you were going and long dark stretches in between. That night it was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but close enough that my breath kept fogging up in front of me. The air felt damp, like it had rained earlier, even though the ground wasn't wet. I remember checking my phone before I started walking, 11:36. I had my hood up, hands in my pockets, just moving at a steady pace. No music, no calls, just the sound of my steps and the river off to the side. At first, everything was normal. The water had that constant movement, a soft, uneven sound as it passed over rocks and bends. Every now and then you'd hear a car somewhere in the distance. Then, without really noticing when it started, the sound of the river changed. It didn't stop. It just flattened, like someone had turned the volume down and smoothed it out. I slowed a little, listening. It didn't sound like water moving anymore, more like a steady hush without any variation. I kept walking. That's when I saw the light. It was ahead of me, maybe 20 or 30 feet down the path, off to the right over the water. Low, just above the surface. It wasn't bright like a flashlight or a headlight. It was softer than that, white but dull, like it wasn't fully lighting the space around it. I stopped. The light didn't move. It just hovered there. I stepped closer to the railing and leaned slightly, trying to get a better look. The water underneath it looked wrong. The current wasn't behaving the way it should. Upstream, I could see the usual ripples and movement. Downstream, too. But directly under the light, the surface looked almost flat. Not completely still, but close, like it was resisting movement. I frowned and leaned in a bit more. There was no splash, no disturbance, nothing touching the water. Just that glow, sitting there. I looked up and down the river. Nothing else like it. No reflection from a building, no overhead light, nothing that explained it. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure it out. Then the air shifted, subtle but noticeable. It felt heavier, like the space around me had thickened slightly. I took a breath. It didn't feel wrong exactly, just different. I straightened up and took a step back from the railing. The light pulsed, once, soft. The water beneath it seemed to tighten with it, like the surface pulled inward for a second. My chest tightened. Not sharp, just a steady pressure. I took another breath, deeper this time. It didn't help. My ears popped. Suddenly, I winced and swallowed. The pressure stayed. The rest of the world felt quieter now. The already muted sound of the river dropped even more. The distant noise from the road disappeared completely. I looked behind me. The path was empty. No one else walking, no movement. I turned back to the light. It seemed closer. Not physically closer, but more present, like it was occupying more of my attention without changing size. I took a step forward before I realized I was doing it. Then another. The pressure in my chest increased slightly. My hands tingled inside my pockets. I stopped walking. The light pulsed again, stronger this time. The water beneath it looked almost frozen for a second, not solid, just paused. My chest tightened sharply. I sucked in a breath. It felt shallow, like I couldn't fill my lungs properly. My vision narrowed slightly at the edges, not darkening, just less clear. I blinked. The light was still there, unmoving. The air around me felt dense, like pushing through something I couldn't see. I gripped the railing. The metal felt colder than it should have. For a second, I thought I saw something inside the light. Not a shape, just a darker section, like something passing behind it. Then it was gone. My ears popped again. Harder this time. The pressure in my chest peaked. I leaned forward slightly, trying to steady myself. Everything felt out of sync, like my body wasn't quite matching what I was seeing. I blinked, and I was standing somewhere else, further down the path, under one of the streetlights. I wasn't leaning on the railing anymore. I was upright, hands still in my pockets, facing forward like I'd been walking. I froze. It took a second for my brain to catch up. I turned around slowly. The spot where I'd been standing was behind me now. The section of railing, the bend in the river. No light, nothing unusual. Just dark water moving normally again. The sound of the river came back all at once, full, uneven, like it had before. I stood there trying to remember how I'd gotten from there to here. Nothing came, no sense of walking, no memory of moving, just a gap. I checked my phone, 12:12. I stared at it. That didn't line up. It hadn't felt like that much time had passed. I looked back at the river again. Still nothing. No glow. No change in the water. Everything looked completely normal. I walked back toward where I thought I'd been standing. Each step felt normal. No pressure. No heaviness. When I reached the railing, I stopped and looked down. The water moved like it always did. Ripples, current, small reflections from the distant lights. No sign anything had been there. I stood there for a minute, waiting to see if anything would happen again. Nothing did. Eventually, I turned and kept walking home. I checked my phone a few more times on the way. The time moved forward like it should. No jumps, no glitches, but I couldn't account for those missing minutes, or how I'd ended up further down the path without remembering it. Now, when I pass that stretch of river at night, I don't stop anymore. I keep walking, even if something catches my eye out over the water. I went up to the roof because I couldn't sleep. It wasn't anything unusual. The building had a small access door at the top of the stairwell, and most people didn't bother with it. But it wasn't locked, and sometimes I'd go up there just to get some air and clear my head. That night, it was just after 2 in the morning. I remember checking my phone before I left my flat, 2:08. The city was quiet in that late night way. Not silent, but reduced. Traffic was lighter, fewer voices, just the distant hum of everything still running. The roof was flat with a low concrete wall around the edge. A few vents, some pipes, nothing else. From up there, you could see down into the street on one side and across to other buildings on the other. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The air felt cool, but still. No wind at all. I walked over to the edge and leaned slightly against the wall, looking out across the buildings. Lights in some windows, others dark. A few cars moving in the distance. Everything looked normal. I stayed there for a couple minutes, just standing, letting things settle. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't in the sky. It was between buildings, low, at about the same height as the rooftop I was standing on, maybe a little lower. It hovered in the gap between 2 apartment blocks across the street, maybe 50 or 60 feet away. At first, I thought it was a drone. That was my first assumption, but it didn't blink. No red or green lights, just a steady white glow, and it wasn't moving, not even slightly. I straightened up and focused on it. The light was round, or at least it looked that way. Not perfectly defined, but contained. It didn't spill out onto the walls around it the way a spotlight would. It just sat there. I leaned forward a bit, trying to get a better angle. Nothing changed, no movement, no sound. That's when I realized how quiet it had gotten. The usual background noise of the city was gone. No cars, no distant voices, no hum from air conditioners or traffic, just nothing. I shifted my weight and listened. Still nothing. I took a step back from the edge. The sound of my shoe on the concrete felt muted, like it didn't carry. I looked back at the light. It pulsed once, soft, barely noticeable, but I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears, like a quick change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air around me felt heavier, not thick enough to stop me breathing, just enough to notice. I rubbed my hands together. There was a faint tingling in my fingers. I looked back at the light. It hadn't moved. It just stayed fixed in that space between the buildings. I tried to look around it, see if there was anything behind it. The walls of the buildings were visible, but the light didn't seem to interact with them properly. It didn't cast shadows the way I expected. It didn't reflect normally. It was just there, separate. I took a few steps along the edge of the roof, trying to change my angle. The light stayed in the same relative position. No matter where I moved, it looked like it was facing me directly. That didn't make sense. I stopped. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. My chest felt tight. Not panic, just a steady weight. I took a breath. It felt shallow, like the air wasn't moving the way it should. I looked back toward the stairwell door for a second. It felt further away than it should have. Not physically, just like it would take more effort to get there. I turned back to the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a clear shape, just a darker section, like something was passing through it or behind it. Then it was gone. The light returned to being uniform. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I winced. The silence deepened. It felt like everything had been pressed down, flattened. Even my own breathing sounded distant. I raised a hand slightly, like I was going to wave or block it. I don't know why. My arm felt slow, not heavy, just delayed. The light pulsed again, stronger. The pressure in my chest spiked. I sucked in a breath. For a second, everything felt out of sync, like my body wasn't keeping up with what I was seeing. I blinked, and suddenly I was standing near the door, not at the edge anymore. My back was almost against the wall beside it. My hand was on the handle. I froze. I didn't remember walking there. I turned around slowly. The edge of the roof was a few steps away now. The buildings across the street looked normal. The gap between them was empty, no light, no glow, just darkness. The sound came back all at once. Cars in the distance, a faint siren somewhere far off, the usual low hum of the city. I stood there for a second trying to catch up. My chest still felt tight, but it was easing. My breathing returned to normal. I looked down at my hands. The tingling was fading. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up. 3:19. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. I'd only been up there for a few minutes. It hadn't felt like more than 5 or 10. I checked again. 3:19. No missed notifications. No calls. Nothing that explained the time. I looked back out at the gap between the buildings. Nothing there. Just empty space and dark windows. I opened the door and went back inside. The stairwell felt normal. The sound of my steps echoed again. Everything was back to how it should be. When I got back to my flat, I checked the time again. 3:21. It kept moving forward normally. But that stretch on the roof didn't line up with it, and now, sometimes when I step outside late at night, I find myself looking between buildings without meaning to, just to see if anything is sitting there where it shouldn't be. I used to walk along the river most nights after work. It wasn't anything special, just a paved path that followed the water for a couple miles, with trees on one side and a low metal railing on the other. But it was quiet, and after a long shift, that was enough. That night, it was colder than usual. Not freezing, but close. The kind of cold that makes your breath visible and your hands stiff if you leave them out too long. There wasn't much wind, just a faint drift off the water. It was late, probably around 11:30. The path lights were spaced out, leaving stretches of darkness in between. You could always hear the river, though, a steady, low movement, water pushing past rocks and bends. I had my hands in my jacket pockets, walking at a normal pace, not really thinking about anything. At some point, I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Not silent, just less. The river still made noise, but it sounded flatter, like it was further away than it should have been. I slowed down a bit. That's when I saw the light. It was out over the water, maybe 15 or 20 feet from the edge. Low, just above the surface. A soft white glow. Not bright enough to light up the whole area, but strong enough that you could clearly see it. I stopped walking. The light didn't move. It just hovered there, steady. I leaned slightly against the railing and looked down at the water beneath it. The current looked wrong. It wasn't moving the way it should. The ripples had flattened out like someone had smoothed them. There was still motion, but it was slow. Too slow. Like the water was hesitating. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. The rest of the river, upstream and downstream, looked normal. But right under the light, it was different. I pulled one hand out of my pocket and rubbed my fingers together. They felt slightly numb, but I figured it was just the cold. I looked back at the light. It pulsed faintly, not brighter, just thicker for a moment. The air around me felt heavier, subtle, like the space had more weight in it. I took a breath. It felt a little harder than it should have. I straightened up and looked around. The path behind me was empty. Ahead of me, just darkness and the next streetlight further down. No one else out. No movement. I looked back at the water. The light hadn't changed position. Still hovering. Still steady. The surface beneath it looked almost still now. Not completely, but close enough that it didn't match the rest of the river. I gripped the railing lightly. It felt colder than usual. The pressure in my chest started then. Not sharp, just a steady weight, like something pressing inward. I took another breath. It didn't ease. I swallowed, trying to shake it off. My ears popped. Sudden. I winced slightly. The sound of the river dropped even more. Now it was barely there, like it had been turned down. I glanced back up at the path, still empty. No sound of cars from the road nearby. No wind through the trees. Just that heavy quiet. I looked back at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape I could follow. Just a darker part within the glow, like something was blocking it from behind. Then it was gone. The light returned to looking uniform. My chest tightened further. I leaned forward slightly, bracing my hands on the railing. The metal vibrated faintly under my palms. I wasn't sure if it actually was or if it just felt that way. The light pulsed again. This time, the pressure in my chest spiked with it. I sucked in a breath. It felt shallow, like I couldn't get a full one. My vision narrowed slightly at the edges. Not dark, just less clear. I blinked. The light was still there, unmoving. The water beneath it barely shifted. Everything else felt distant. The path, the trees. Even my own body, like I was slightly out of place. I tried to step back from the railing. My legs felt slow, not heavy, just delayed. I blinked again, and the next thing I knew, I was standing further down the path, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, near the next streetlight. I wasn't leaning on the railing anymore. I was just standing there, facing forward. My hands were back in my pockets. I didn't remember walking. I turned around slowly. The section of river where I'd been standing was behind me now. The light was gone, no glow, no reflection. The water looked normal again, moving the way it should. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch up. My chest still felt tight, but it was easing. My breathing returned to normal. The sound of the river came back fully. Cars in the distance, wind through the trees, everything. I checked my phone, 12:18. I frowned. I was sure it hadn't been that late before. It hadn't felt like I'd been out there that long. I looked back at the spot again. Nothing unusual, just dark water and the faint reflection of the streetlights. I walked back toward it slowly. Each step felt normal, no delay, no heaviness. When I reached the railing again, I stopped. Looked down. The water moved like it always did. No sign of anything slowing it. I stayed there for a minute, watching. Nothing changed. I finally turned and walked the rest of the way home. I kept checking my phone as I went. The time moved forward normally. No jumps, no missing minutes. But I couldn't account for how I'd moved down the path without remembering it, or how long I'd been standing there before it happened. And sometimes now, when I walk past that same stretch of river, I catch myself slowing down without meaning to, just to see if the water looks any different than it should. I noticed the ladder before I even had my coffee. It was early, still kind of gray outside. Not fully light yet, just that flat morning light that makes everything look washed out. The grass was damp, and there was a bit of mist hanging low over the yard. I opened the back door to let some air in, and that's when I saw it. The ladder was out, leaning against the side of the house, right below the upstairs window. I stopped in the doorway for a second. I kept the ladder in the shed. Always had. It was one of those things I didn't move unless I needed it, and I definitely hadn't needed it recently. I walked out onto the patio, still trying to wake up, thinking maybe I'd just forgotten using it. But the angle it was leaning at didn't make sense. It was set carefully, not just dropped there. The feet were planted evenly on the grass, the top resting just under the window frame like someone had positioned it properly. I stood there, looking up at the window, closed, nothing out of place. I looked back at the ladder. There was no mud on it, no sign it had been dragged across the yard. It looked like it had just been picked up and set there. I checked the shed, door still latched, nothing disturbed inside. I came back out and stood next to the ladder again. That's when I noticed the grass, a patch about 6 or 7 feet across, just off to the side of where the ladder stood. It wasn't flattened. Not exactly. It looked off. Slightly darker than the surrounding grass, like it had been pressed or warmed or something. The edges of it were soft, almost circular, but not perfect. I walked over to it. The ground felt normal under my feet. Not soft, not burnt, just different looking. I crouched down and touched the grass. It was damp like the rest, but the color didn't match. It had a faint dullness to it, like it had lost some of its green. I stood back up and looked around the yard. Fence was intact, gate still closed, no footprints I could see, no sign anyone had been in there. I lived alone. No one else had access to the yard. I went back inside and grabbed my phone, checked the time. 6:18. I tried to think back to the night before. I'd gone to bed around midnight. Nothing unusual. I hadn't heard anything during the night. No noise, no movement outside. I went upstairs and checked the window the ladder was leaning under. Still locked. No marks on the frame. No sign it had been opened. I went back downstairs and stood in the kitchen, looking out at the yard again. Something about the whole thing felt wrong, but I couldn't pin down exactly what. I made coffee, trying to shake it off. Figured maybe I just moved the ladder and forgot. It didn't feel likely, but it was the easiest explanation. I left the ladder where it was and got ready for work. Before I left, I stepped out again to take one more look. The yard was brighter now with the sun coming up. The discolored patch was more obvious in the daylight. Still faint, but definitely there. The ladder hadn't moved. Everything else looked normal. I locked up and left. At work, I didn't think about it much at first, just busy with everything. But around mid-morning, I checked the time on my phone and noticed something. It said 10:07. The wall clock in the office said 9:42. I frowned. I figured one of them was off. I checked another clock, 9:42. I looked back at my phone, 10:07, exactly 25 minutes ahead. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. I restarted my phone thinking it was just a glitch. When it came back on, it synced to the correct time. 9:43. I shrugged it off, but something about that number stuck with me. 25 minutes. When I got home later that day, the ladder was still there. Same position. Nothing had changed. I walked out into the yard again. The patch of grass was still visible. Maybe slightly more faded now, or maybe I was just focusing on it more. I stood in the middle of it, looking up at the sky. Nothing unusual. Clear. Quiet. I walked over to the ladder and grabbed it, pulled it away from the house. It felt normal. Just the ladder. I carried it back to the shed and put it inside. Closed the door, latched it. Then I went back out and stood in the yard again. I don't know why, just stood there. The air felt still, heavier than usual. Not enough to really notice unless you were paying attention. I looked down at the grass where the circle had been. For a second I thought I saw something shift. Not the grass itself, just the way the light hit it, like the air above it moved slightly. I blinked, it looked normal again. I went inside. That night, I kept waking up. No noise, no reason, just waking up. At one point, I checked the time, 2:11. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was morning. Alarm going off, 6:30. I got up, went downstairs, and opened the back door again. The ladder was back, leaning in the exact same place, same angle, same position under the window. I just stood there in the doorway, not moving. The shed door was still latched. I walked over slowly, checked it. Still closed, still locked. I turned back to the yard. The circular patch was there again, slightly darker than the rest. Same size, same shape. I checked my phone, 6:31. Then I looked at the clock on the wall inside, 6:06. I didn't reset anything that time. I just stood there looking out at the yard, trying to remember if I'd gone outside during the night. But I couldn't remember anything at all between checking the time at 2:11 and waking up to the alarm. And the ladder was already back where I hadn't left it. I was the last one left in the office that night. It wasn't unusual. End of the month always meant staying late, catching up on reports no one wanted to deal with during the day. The building was mostly glass on one side, a long stretch of windows overlooking the car park and the road beyond it. During the day it was bright, but at night it turned into a mirror. You could barely see outside unless something moved. It was raining earlier, not heavy, just enough to leave streaks on the glass and that damp smell in the air when people came in. By the time I was alone, the rain had stopped, but the ground outside was still wet, reflecting the street lights in broken patches. I was sitting at my desk facing my monitor, back to the windows. The only lights on were the ones over my section and a few in the hallway behind me. Everything else was dark. I had music playing quietly through my computer speakers, just to fill the space. Otherwise, it would have been too quiet. Around 11:40, I noticed the reflection. At first, it didn't register as anything strange. Just a light behind me, reflected in the window in front of me. A soft, circular glow, white. It sat just over my right shoulder in the reflection, maybe a foot above where my head would be if I leaned back. I assumed it was a car pulling into the lot. I didn't turn around right away. I just kept typing, glancing at it in the reflection, but it didn't move. It didn't sweep across the glass like headlights usually do. It just stayed there, steady. I slowed my typing, looked at it more closely. The edges of it were too clean, not diffused like light through wet glass or distance. It looked contained, like a circle placed on the window. I frowned and turned around. There was nothing behind me, just the empty office, rows of desks, dark monitors, the hallway lights, no bright light. No source for what I'd just seen. I turned back to the window. The reflection was still there. Same spot, same size. That's when I felt that slight shift in my stomach. Not panic, just confusion. I leaned forward a bit, trying to change the angle. The light didn't move with me. It stayed fixed in the reflection. I glanced down at my desk. Nothing on it was bright enough to cause that kind of reflection. My monitor was on, but the glow from it didn't match what I was seeing. I turned around again. Still nothing. The office looked completely normal, quiet, empty. I turned back to the window. The light pulsed once, soft, like it had just breathed. I froze. My music cut out, mid-song. No fade, just silence. I didn't touch anything. I sat there staring at the reflection. The light didn't pulse again. It just stayed steady. My ears popped, sudden and sharp. I swallowed, but it didn't clear. The pressure built slightly, like being in an elevator moving too fast. I put a hand on the desk. My fingers felt strange, not numb, just distant, like I wasn't fully connected to them. I looked at the reflection again. The light seemed closer now, not bigger, just nearer. Hard to explain, like the space between me and it had shortened somehow. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up. The legs scraped lightly against the floor, but the sound felt muted. I turned around again, still nothing. No light, no movement. I walked a few steps down the row of desks, looking back at where I'd been sitting. Everything looked normal from this angle. No hidden light source, no reflection. I turned back toward the window. The light was still there, right where it had been. I took a step toward it. My ears popped again, harder this time. I winced. The pressure in the air felt heavier, like the room had gotten smaller without anything physically changing. The light flickered. For a split second, I thought I saw something behind it. Not in it, behind it. Like it wasn't the source, but something in front of whatever was. Then it went back to being just a circle. I stopped moving. My chest felt tight, not like I couldn't breathe, just like the air was thicker. I looked down at my computer screen. It had gone blank, completely white. No cursor, no windows, just a flat, empty screen. I hadn't touched the keyboard, I hadn't closed anything. I stepped closer to the desk. The light in the reflection pulsed again. This time, the pressure in my ears spiked with it. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. For a second, everything felt slightly out of sync, like my body and the room weren't moving together. I blinked. The light was gone, just gone. The window reflected the dark office again, my chair, my desk, nothing else. The pressure in my ears faded quickly. The air felt normal again. Sound came back in, distant traffic. The faint hum of the building. My computer screen flickered. Then my desktop reappeared, exactly where I'd left it. My music started playing again, picking up mid-song. I stood there, trying to piece it together. I looked at the clock on the wall. 12:18. I checked my phone. 12:08. The last time I'd checked, it had been 11:42. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. It hadn't felt like more than a few minutes. I looked back at the window. Nothing. Just my reflection. The dark office behind me. I sat back down slowly. My hands still had that faint, disconnected feeling, like they'd fallen asleep and were just starting to wake up. I moved the mouse. The computer responded normally. No errors, no signs anything had happened. I opened one of the files I'd been working on. Everything was still there, saved, unchanged. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off in that space behind me. Something that only showed up in the reflection. I packed up not long after that, turned off the lights, left the office. When I got to my car, I checked the time again. 12:27. It kept moving forward normally. But for that stretch inside, it hadn't felt like time had passed the way it should have. And sometimes when I stay late now, I catch myself looking at the windows without meaning to, just to make sure there's nothing standing behind me that I can't see directly. I was out in the garage working on a small engine when it happened. Nothing complicated, just cleaning up a carburetor off an old mower I'd been meaning to fix. It was late, maybe just after 11. The house was quiet, everyone else asleep. The garage is detached, a few steps across the driveway from the back door. It's got those long fluorescent strip lights overhead, the kind that buzz faintly even when they're working properly. I had both of them on, along with a small desk lamp on the workbench. Everything felt normal. The air was a little cold, but not uncomfortable. I had the side door cracked open just enough to let in some fresh air. You could hear the usual night sounds, distant cars, a dog barking somewhere far off, the occasional wind brushing against the fence. I was standing at the bench, tools laid out in front of me, when the lights dimmed. Not flickered. Dimmed. Like someone had turned a dial down slowly. I looked up. The fluorescent tubes overhead dropped to a dull, grayish glow. The desk lamp dimmed with them. The hum from the lights deepened slightly, like the pitch had shifted. I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. For a second, I thought maybe the power was about to go out. But instead of cutting completely, the lights held at that low level. Then they started to brighten again, slowly, but not normally. The brightness didn't feel right. It got stronger than it should have been. The white from the tubes became harsh, almost flat, like it wasn't spreading properly. The shadows on the walls sharpened in a way that didn't match the angle of the lights. I frowned and looked around. The tools hanging on the wall, wrenches, screwdrivers, cast long, thin shadows that didn't quite line up with where the light was coming from. Then I felt it, a low hum. Not from the lights, from everywhere. At first, it was faint, just enough that I thought it might be coming from outside. Maybe a distant engine or something passing on the road. But it built quickly, steady, deep. It vibrated through the floor up into my feet. I shifted my weight. The feeling stayed. The tools on the wall started to move slightly, not swinging, just trembling. You could hear a faint metallic chatter as they touched against each other. I stepped back from the bench. The hum got stronger. It wasn't loud, just present, like it was inside the air itself. My ears popped. Sharp. I winced and swallowed. Trying to clear it, the pressure stayed, the air felt heavier. Breathing took a bit more effort. I looked toward the open side door. The darkness outside looked normal. No light, no movement. But the sound from outside had dropped away. No cars, no wind, nothing. Just the hum. I took a step toward the door. The vibration in the floor intensified slightly with each step. I stopped halfway. The lights overhead pulsed, not flickered. Pulsed. Bright. Dim. Bright. In a slow, steady rhythm. My chest felt tight, not panic, just pressure. I held my hands out slightly in front of me. They were tingling. Faint at first, then more noticeable. Like pins and needles, but smoother. The hum deepened. For a second, I thought I could feel it in my teeth. I looked back at the tools. The slight trembling had become more pronounced. Still not swinging, but enough that you could clearly see movement. The shadows on the wall shifted with the pulsing light. I blinked. The edges of things looked off. Not blurred, just less solid, like the outlines of objects weren't quite fixed. The hum peaked, and then it stopped, instantly. The lights snapped back to normal brightness. The tools went still. The air felt light again. The usual night sounds rushed back in all at once. Distant traffic, wind against the fence, everything. I stood there for a few seconds trying to catch up. The garage looked exactly the same as it had before. Workbench, tools, nothing out of place. I took a breath. It felt normal. No pressure, no heaviness. I looked down at my watch. It was an old analog one I wear out of habit. The second hand was ticking, steady, normal, but the time was off. I frowned. I checked the clock on the wall above the bench. Then my phone. All three didn't match. The wall clock and my phone said 11:52. My watch said 11:27, exactly 25 minutes behind. I stared at it. The second hand kept moving. No pause, no stutter. Just ticking forward like nothing had happened. I turned my wrist slightly, watching it, waiting for it to jump or correct itself. It didn't. It just kept going. I looked around the garage again. Everything was still, quiet, normal. I walked over to the wall clock and tapped it lightly. It didn't change. I checked my phone again. Still 11:52. I stood there for a while, trying to think back. The moment the lights dimmed. The hum building. The pulsing. It hadn't felt like 25 minutes. It had felt like a few minutes at most. Maybe less. I went back to the bench and sat down. My hands still had a faint tingling in them. Not strong, just enough to notice. I didn't finish the repair that night. I turned off the lights and went back inside. The house felt normal, warm, quiet. But I kept looking at my watch, watching the second hand move, counting. It never caught up. It stayed 25 minutes behind. I reset it the next morning. But now, whenever I'm in the garage late and the lights even flicker a little, I stop what I'm doing and I listen, just in case that hum comes back. I got stuck at that crossing more times than I could count. It was on a back road just outside of town, the kind of place where trains passed through at random hours, and you'd end up waiting even when you couldn't see or hear anything coming. That night, it was just after midnight. I'd left work late and was taking the usual route home. The roads were empty, no other cars around, just the occasional streetlight and long stretches of darkness in between. It had been drizzling earlier, and the road was still damp. The air had that quiet, heavy feel to it, like everything was holding still. I came up to the crossing and saw the red lights already flashing. No barriers on this one, just the lights and the crossbuck sign. They blinked steadily, casting that red wash across the wet road. I slowed and rolled to a stop a few feet before the tracks. I turned the radio down. Habit. You listen for the train. Usually you'd hear it before you saw it. The low rumble, the horn, something. But there was nothing. Just the ticking of my engine and the steady click of the crossing lights. I leaned forward slightly, looking down the tracks in both directions. Empty. No headlights. No movement. I sat back in the seat and waited. After maybe a minute, I started to get that familiar annoyance. You know, when you're stuck waiting and there's clearly nothing coming. I glanced at the time on the dashboard. 12:17. The red lights kept flashing, still no sound. I tapped the steering wheel lightly with my fingers. Another minute passed. Then I noticed the glow. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the crossing lights on the wet rails, but it didn't match the rhythm. It was steady, white, and it was coming from farther down the tracks, maybe 50 yards ahead. I leaned forward again. The glow hovered just above the rails. Not high, maybe a couple feet off the ground. It didn't spread out like normal light. It was contained, like a soft ball of brightness that didn't quite reach the surrounding area. I squinted, trying to see what was causing it. No shape I could make out. Just that white glow sitting there. The red crossing lights kept flashing behind me, reflecting faintly off it. I waited for it to move. It didn't. The road around me felt quieter than before. I realized I couldn't hear anything beyond the clicking of the crossing signal. No wind, no distant cars, nothing. I reached over and turned the radio knob just to check. No sound, not even static. I frowned and tapped it. Still nothing. The glow pulsed slightly, not bright enough to hurt your eyes. Just a soft shift, like it was breathing. I felt a pressure in my ears, sudden, sharp. I swallowed, trying to clear it. It didn't go away. It felt like being in an airplane when the cabin pressure changes too fast. I shifted in my seat. The air inside the car felt thicker. Hard to describe, not like I couldn't breathe. Just like the space itself had weight to it. I looked back at the glow. It seemed closer. Not by much, but enough that I noticed. I blinked a few times. It stayed where it was. I gripped the steering wheel. My fingers felt slightly numb. That same pins and needles feeling, but duller. The crossing lights kept flashing. Red, on, off. The timing felt slower now, or maybe I was just noticing it more. I looked down at the dashboard. The clock still read 12:17. The seconds weren't moving. I stared at it. It didn't change. The engine sound dropped. Not off, just lower, like it was being muffled. I pressed the accelerator lightly. No change. The engine didn't respond. The glow pulsed again. This time the pressure in my ears spiked. I winced. For a second, everything felt slightly out of sync, like my body was lagging behind what I was seeing. I blinked. The glow was gone. Completely. The tracks ahead were empty again. Dark. Wet. Normal. The crossing lights were still flashing. The sound came back all at once. The click of the signal, the faint hum of something in the distance, even the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement far away. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. I looked down at the dashboard. The clock now read 12:24. I stared at it. 7 minutes. I didn't remember those minutes passing. I turned the key slightly, just to check. The engine cut. Then I tried to start it again. Nothing, just a dull click. I tried again. Same thing. The interior lights dimmed slightly with each attempt. I sat back. My hands were still tingling. I looked at the tracks again. Still empty. No train. No lights in the distance. The crossing lights kept flashing red. On. Off. On. Off. Another car didn't come up behind me. No one else stopped. It was just me sitting there. I tried the engine again. Click. Nothing. I waited. I don't know how long, maybe a couple minutes, maybe more. Then, without warning, the crossing lights stopped. Just like that. No slowing. No final flash. They just went dark. The silence felt bigger for a second. Then normal sound filled back in. I turned the key again. The engine started immediately. No hesitation. Like nothing had happened. I sat there for a second. then drove forward, crossing the tracks. As I passed over them, I glanced to the side. There was nothing there, no sign anything had been on the rails. I kept driving. The radio came back on, mid-song. I hadn't turned it back on. I checked the clock again, 12:25. It kept ticking normally now. When I got home, I sat in the car for a minute before going inside. The engine idled steady. Everything felt normal again. But for a few minutes out there, it hadn't. And the part that stuck with me wasn't just the light, it was how long I'd been sitting there without realizing it, and how the crossing lights had stayed red the entire time, even though nothing ever came. I cut through the playground most nights when I walked home from work. It shaved maybe 10 minutes off the route, and after a long shift, I didn't really feel like taking the longer way around. It was a small park, mostly for kids, chain link fence all the way around, one gate that didn't latch properly, and inside there were swings, a slide, one of those plastic climbing frames. Nothing special. During the day it was always loud, but at night it was empty. That night it was colder than usual. Not freezing, but the kind of cold that sits in the air and makes everything feel still. My breath was visible, just faintly. There wasn't any wind. I had my headphones in, but I wasn't really listening to anything. Just something low playing in the background. As I came up to the corner where the fence starts, I noticed the light. At first I thought it was a car passing somewhere behind the trees, but it didn't move like headlights. It was too steady. It was inside the playground, low to the ground. Pale, almost white, but not quite. It didn't spread out like normal light either. It just sort of sat there, like a patch. I slowed down without really thinking about it. The music in my headphones kept playing, but I became aware of something else under it. A faint, metallic sound. Soft, irregular. I pulled one earbud out. The sound was coming from the fence. A light rattling, not like someone shaking it hard, more like something brushing against it over and over. I stopped walking. The fence ran along the pavement, separating me from the playground. The light was maybe 20 feet inside, near the swings. I couldn't see anything causing it. No person, no animal, just that low glow and the slight movement of the fence. The metal links shifted slightly, catching the light. Tick, tick, tick. Soft, uneven. I stepped closer. The closer I got, the more I noticed how quiet everything else was. No cars passing, no wind in the trees. Even the distant hum of the city seemed to have dropped away. Just the faint rattle and that light. I stood a few feet from the fence and looked through. The swings were still, not moving at all, but the light was directly under one of them. I squinted, trying to make out what was actually there. It wasn't lighting up the swing properly. The seat just sort of faded into it, like the edges weren't clear. The ground underneath looked flat, too flat. Like the texture of the dirt and grass had been smoothed out. The rattling got slightly louder. I looked to my right. The fence bowed inward very slightly, like something was pressing against it from the inside. Not enough to bend it, just enough to shift it. I took a step back. The metal links settled for a second, then started again. Tick, tick, tick. My chest felt tight. I told myself it was probably an animal, a fox or something stuck in there. But there was no shape, no movement I could follow. Just that pressure on the fence and the light sitting there like it didn't belong. I glanced toward the gate. It was on the far side, maybe 30 feet away. Closed, at least it had been. I looked back at the light. It pulsed slightly. Not brighter, just denser for a second. I felt something in my ears, a pressure, like going up a hill too fast. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The rattling stopped. Completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I realized my music had cut out. My phone was still in my pocket, but there was nothing playing anymore. I didn't remember pausing it. I took another step back. The light flickered, just once. And in that split second, I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape I could describe. Just a darker part inside the glow, like something was between me and it. Then it was gone. The light stayed, steady again. I turned my head toward the gate. Something felt off. I walked along the fence, keeping a bit of distance now. My eyes stayed on the light, but I kept checking the gate. When I reached it, I stopped. It was slightly open, not wide, just enough that it wasn't lined up with the latch anymore. I stared at it. I knew it had been closed. I walked this way almost every night. I always noticed it because it never shut properly. You had to push it to make it catch. This time, it wasn't caught at all. It moved slightly, a slow, gentle swing, no wind. I looked back toward the center of the playground. The light was gone, no fade, no dimming, just gone. The space where it had been looked normal now. Grass, dirt, the swing hanging still above it, but the silence stayed. I stepped back from the gate. My ears popped again. Hard. I winced and grabbed the side of my head. For a second, everything felt slightly tilted. Not visually, just off. I blinked a few times. The feeling passed. The normal night sounds came back in slowly. A car in the distance, wind brushing the trees. My phone suddenly buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up. My music started playing again from the exact point it had stopped. I stared at the time. It was nearly 40 minutes later than I expected. There was no way I'd been standing there that long. It hadn't felt like more than a few minutes. I looked back at the playground. Everything was normal. Dark, still. The gate was still slightly open. I didn't go through. I kept walking, taking the longer route home. I checked my phone a few times on the way. The time stayed consistent. No jumps, no glitches, just normal. When I got home, I checked the step counter out of habit. It showed a gap. A flat line for about 30 minutes. No movement recorded at all, like I'd been standing still. But I knew I'd walked part of that time. At least I thought I had. Now, when I pass that park at night, I stay on the other side of the street. And I don't look too closely at the fence anymore. I was doing late deliveries out past the edge of town, the kind of route where houses get further apart the deeper you go. Gravel roads, long driveways, no streetlights, just the occasional porch light cutting through the dark. It was just after 9:30 when I turned off the main road onto a narrower one that led out into farmland. The address I had was near the end of that stretch, one of those standalone houses set back from the road with a big yard around it. My GPS said I was about 5 minutes away. The van was quiet except for the engine and the occasional rattle from the shelves in the back. I had the radio on low, just for some background noise. As I got closer, the road got rougher. More gravel, more dips. I slowed down a bit, headlights bouncing off fences and the edges of fields. Then I saw the house. It sat off to the right, maybe 50 yards back from the road. Single-story, wide front yard, a couple of trees near the driveway. There was a porch light on, warm yellow, and a faint light in one of the front windows. I checked the address again. It matched. I pulled into the driveway. Gravel crunched under the tires as I rolled forward. The headlights swept across the front of the house, lighting up the door, the windows, the small set of steps leading up to the porch. Everything looked normal. I put the van in park and reached over to grab the package from the passenger seat. That's when the lights went out. All of them. Porch light, window, everything. Just gone. I froze for a second, package in my hands. The headlights from the van were still on, lighting up the front of the house, but without the house lights, everything looked different. Flat. Empty. I waited. Sometimes people turn off lights when they're heading to bed, I thought. Maybe bad timing. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold, still. No wind at all. I closed the van door behind me and started walking toward the house. Gravel under my boots sounded louder than usual. Halfway up the driveway, I noticed the glow. It was above the roofline. Not directly overhead, but just beyond the peak of the house, maybe 10 or 15 feet above it. At first, I thought it was the moon, but it wasn't in the right position, and it wasn't that kind of light. It was pale, white, soft, but steady. I stopped walking. The glow didn't move. It just sat there, hovering above the house. The shadows in the yard stretched long and thin, angled away from it in a way that didn't quite match the direction it was coming from. I looked around. No other houses nearby, no vehicles, no sound. Even the usual night noise, crickets, distant cars, was gone, just silence. I took a few more steps forward. The closer I got, the more the light seemed to press down into the space around the house. Not brighter, just heavier. My ears popped. I swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed. I shifted the package in my hands. My fingers tingled slightly. At first, I thought it was from the cold, but it felt different, more even, like a low current running through them. I looked back at the van. It seemed further away than it should have been. Not by much, just enough to notice. I turned back to the house. The front door was still closed. No movement inside, no sign anyone had noticed me. The glow above the roof pulsed, once, soft, barely noticeable. The shadows in the yard shifted slightly with it. I felt it in my chest more than I saw it. A subtle pressure, in and out. I stopped again. Something about the way the light just hung there made me not want to get any closer. I stood there, trying to decide whether to keep going or turn back. The glow didn't change, it just stayed fixed. For a second, I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending. I blinked. It looked the same as before. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I winced. The pressure built quickly, then held. The silence deepened. I realized I couldn't hear my own breathing properly. It sounded distant, muted. I looked at the front door again, still closed. No movement, no sign of anyone inside. I took a step back. The moment I did, the pressure eased slightly. I took another step back, then another. The glow stayed where it was, unchanged. I didn't turn around right away. I kept my eyes on it as I backed up toward the van. The gravel crunched under my boots, the sound slowly returning to normal. When I reached the van, I opened the door and got in. The interior felt normal, familiar. I set the package back on the seat, sat there for a second. Then I looked back at the house. The glow was gone. No fade, no movement, just gone. The house lights were still off. Everything looked dark and still. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. As I reached the road, I glanced in the mirror. The house was barely visible now, just a dark shape against the darker field behind it. No light, no movement. I drove for a while without thinking, just following the route. The radio came back on, the sound normal again. The air felt right. The pressure in my ears was gone. When I got to the next stop, I parked and sat there for a second before getting out. Something felt off. I checked the delivery app. The route log showed a gap from 9:42 to 10:22. No activity recorded, no movement, just a blank space between entries. I stared at it. There was no way I'd been sitting in that driveway for 40 minutes. It hadn't felt like more than a few. I looked back down the road. Nothing there, just darkness. I skipped that delivery, marked it as undeliverable, and moved on. Later, when I checked the address again, it was still in the system. Same house, same location. But now, when I drive out that way, I slow down when I get near that road, and I don't turn in anymore. I got back to the building later than usual that night, a little after 1:30. It had been raining earlier, not heavy, just enough to leave everything damp and reflective. The pavement outside still had that dark sheen, and there was a faint smell of wet concrete in the air when I walked in. The lobby was empty. No one at the front desk, no one coming in or out. Just the low hum of the vending machines against the far wall and the quiet ticking of the clock behind the desk. I nodded out of habit, even though there was no one there, and headed for the stairs instead of the lift. I always took the stairs that late. Less waiting, less noise. The stairwell was normal. Dim lighting, the kind that buzzes faintly if you stand still long enough to notice it. The smell of dust and old paint. My footsteps echoing slightly as I went up. I lived on the 4th floor. By the time I got there, I could feel that slight quiet you get in apartment buildings late at night, where everything feels settled. No TVs through the walls, no voices, just the building itself. I pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. That's when I noticed the light. It was coming from the far end. Soft. Not bright like a ceiling light, more like a glow. At first, I thought maybe someone had left their door open and the light was spilling out. But it didn't look like that. It wasn't angled. It didn't stretch across the floor. It just sat there, low and steady, like it was coming from somewhere in the air itself. I stood still, one hand still on the stairwell door. The overhead lights flickered once, just a quick dip. Then they steadied again. The glow didn't change. If anything, it looked slightly clearer after the flicker, like the hallway had darkened around it. I let the door close behind me. The sound of it clicking shut felt louder than it should have. I started walking, slowly. The carpet muffled my steps, but I could still hear them soft and even. The glow stayed where it was. It didn't move, didn't flicker. Just a fixed point at the far end of the hall. I passed the first couple of doors, all closed. Everything normal. I kept my eyes on the light. The closer I got, the harder it was to tell exactly where it was coming from. It didn't seem attached to any specific door or fixture. It just occupied that space. About halfway down the hall, I noticed something else. The usual background noise of the building, pipes, distant movement, anything. It was gone. Not quieter. Gone. I stopped walking. The silence felt complete, like the air itself wasn't carrying sound. I shifted slightly, listening. Nothing. I took another step forward. The glow seemed closer now, but still not tied to anything. My ears popped. Sudden. Sharp. I swallowed. It didn't help. The pressure stayed, like being on a plane that hadn't leveled out yet. I kept moving. My hand brushed lightly against the wall as I walked, just to ground myself. The texture felt normal, but there was a faint vibration under it, barely there, like something humming deep inside the structure. I stopped again. The glow pulsed once, soft. I felt it in my chest more than anything. A quick tightening, then release. I looked down the hallway. One of the apartment doors near the end, on the right, was slightly open. I hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't wide open, just enough that there was a thin line of darkness between the door and the frame. I frowned. That door was always closed. I didn't know the person who lived there, but I'd never seen it open, even during the day. I looked back at the glow. It was gone. Not fading. Just gone. The hallway looked normal again. Same dim lighting, same narrow space. The overhead lights were steady. The silence stayed. I stood there halfway down the hall, trying to process it. The open door drew my attention. I took a step toward it, then another. My footsteps still made almost no sound. The closer I got, the more noticeable the pressure in my ears became. It felt deeper now, like it had shifted inward. I stopped a few feet from the door. The gap was just wide enough to see darkness inside. No light, no movement. I waited. Nothing changed. I reached out slightly, like I was going to knock. Then stopped. Something felt off. Not danger exactly, just wrong. Like I was about to do something I shouldn't. I pulled my hand back. The faint vibration in the wall was still there. I noticed it again when I leaned slightly toward the door. It wasn't coming from inside the apartment. It felt like it was in the hallway itself. I stepped back. As soon as I did, the pressure in my ears eased slightly. Not gone, just less. I turned my head, looking back toward the stairwell. The hallway behind me looked normal, but it felt farther away than it should have. I took another step back, then another. The door stayed slightly open, unchanged. I didn't see any movement inside. No sound. Nothing. I turned and walked back toward the stairwell. The silence followed me for a few steps. Then, gradually, I started to hear things again. A faint creak somewhere in the building. The low hum of electricity in the lights. My own breathing. By the time I reached my door, everything sounded normal again. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. The apartment felt the same as always. Warm. Quiet. I stood there for a second, listening. No hum. No pressure. Just normal silence. I checked my phone. 1:57. I stared at it. That didn't line up. I'd gotten into the building around 1:30. There was no way that walk up the stairs and down the hallway took that long. I went back to the door and opened it slightly, looking out into the hallway. Everything looked normal. The door at the far end, the one that had been open, was closed now. Fully shut. No gap. No sign it had ever been open. I stepped out into the hallway. Walked down toward it again. The air felt normal. No pressure. No vibration. I stopped in front of the door. Closed. Still. I listened. Nothing from inside. I stood there for a minute, then turned and went back to my apartment. I locked the door behind me. Now, every time I come up the stairs late at night, I pause before stepping into the hallway, just to see if that glow is there again, at the far end. I stopped in the park mostly out of habit. It sat between my place and the main road, a strip of trees with a path running through it and a couple of benches spaced out along the way. During the day it was busy enough, but at dusk it emptied out fast. That evening had that dim, gray light you get just before it fully drops into night. Not dark yet, but everything already losing color. The air was cool and still, no wind moving through the branches. I'd been walking for a while and decided to sit for a minute. The bench was near the center of the wooded section, surrounded by trees on all sides. You couldn't see the street from there, just layers of trunks and branches fading into each other. I sat down, leaned back slightly, and just listened. At first, everything was normal. Leaves shifting faintly, a bird somewhere deeper in the trees, the distant hum of traffic beyond the park. Nothing unusual. I checked my phone out of habit. 7:18. I put it back in my pocket and let my head rest against the back of the bench. That's when I noticed the sound. It was faint at first, low, steady. I thought it was just the distant traffic blending into the background, but as I focused on it, I realized it wasn't coming from the same direction. It felt like it was above me, not directly overhead, just somewhere up in the canopy. I sat up a bit, listening more carefully. The hum didn't change, didn't rise or fall, just a constant tone, like something running at a steady frequency. I looked up through the branches. At first, I didn't see anything, just the darkening sky broken up by leaves and limbs. Then I noticed the light. It was dim, barely there, filtering through the branches in a way that didn't match the fading daylight. Soft, white, moving slowly. I leaned forward slightly, trying to follow it. The light shifted between gaps in the leaves, sliding from one opening to another. It wasn't fast. It moved at a steady, controlled pace. Too steady. It didn't flicker like something passing behind the trees. It didn't change brightness with the gaps. It just moved. I stood up from the bench. The hum became more noticeable as I did. Still not loud, just more present, like it was filling the space around me. I stepped a few feet away from the bench, craning my neck upward. The light passed over another break in the branches, clearer for a second. It wasn't shaped like anything I recognized, just a soft, rounded glow, contained. It didn't spread out onto the leaves the way a flashlight or streetlight would. It just stayed within itself. I frowned and turned slowly, trying to keep it in view as it moved. The rest of the forest felt quieter now. The leaves weren't moving anymore. The faint sounds I'd noticed earlier had faded. Even the distant traffic seemed gone. I took a breath. The air felt heavier, subtle, but there, like it had more weight to it. The hum stayed steady. I looked back up at the light. For a second, it slipped behind a thicker cluster of branches and disappeared. Then it reappeared on the other side, continuing its slow path. I stepped forward, trying to keep pace with it. My movements felt slightly off, not slow, just delayed. Like there was a fraction of a second between deciding to move and actually moving. I stopped. The light paused. Or maybe it just slowed enough that it looked like it had. The hum deepened slightly. My ears popped, sharp and sudden. I winced and swallowed. The pressure stayed. I shifted my weight. My hands tingled faintly at my sides. I raised one slightly, watching my fingers. The feeling didn't go away. I looked back up. The light pulsed once, soft. I felt it in my chest more than anything. A brief tightening, then release. The trees around me seemed flatter somehow. Not visually, just less detailed. Like the edges of things weren't as sharp. I blinked a few times. The light continued moving. Slow, steady. I realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps anymore, or my breathing. Everything was muted. The hum filled the space. I took a step back, then another. The light moved past another gap in the branches, heading deeper into the trees. Then it faded. Not quickly, just gradually. The glow thinning until it wasn't visible anymore. The hum didn't stop right away. It lingered for a few seconds after the light was gone. Then it cut off, instantly. The silence that followed was complete. Not just quiet. Empty. I stood there waiting. No leaves moving, no birds, no distant traffic, nothing. I checked my phone. The screen lit up. 7:52. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. It hadn't felt like more than a few minutes since I sat down. I looked back at the bench. It was right where I'd left it. Nothing had changed. The trees looked normal again, but the silence stayed. Longer than it should have. Even after the hum was gone. Even after the light had disappeared. I stood there for a while, waiting for the usual sounds to return. They didn't. Not right away. It took a few minutes before I heard anything. A faint rustle of leaves, a distant car. Gradually, everything came back, like someone turning the volume up slowly. I sat back down on the bench, trying to piece together how much time had actually passed. My chest still felt slightly tight. My hands still had that faint tingling. I checked my phone again. 7:54. It was moving normally. But there was a gap I couldn't account for, and the way the forest had gone completely silent, that part stuck with me more than anything. Now, when I walk through that park at dusk, I don't sit on that bench anymore. I keep moving, even if I hear something above the trees that I can't quite place. The taxi dropped me off just after 1 a.m. I remember checking the time as I got out, 1:12. The street was quiet, the kind of still you only get that late when everything's shut down and even the usual background noise feels distant. It had been a cold night, dry, with a slight bite in the air. My breath showed faintly as I stepped onto the pavement. The driver gave a quick nod through the mirror. I said thanks, shut the door, and watched him pull away. Nothing unusual. The car rolled down the street, taillights shrinking as it turned the corner at the far end. I stood there for a second, adjusting my jacket, digging in my pocket for my keys. That's when I noticed the light. It was in the middle of the street, right about where the taxi had just been, low, hovering maybe 3 or 4 feet above the road. At first, I thought it might be some kind of reflection from a passing car or a streetlight catching something at an angle. But there were no cars, and the streetlights weren't positioned in a way that would create that kind of glow. It was soft, white, not bright enough to light up the whole area, but clear enough that it stood out against the dark pavement. I froze, keys still in my hand. The light didn't move. It didn't flicker. It just hung there. I took a step forward, squinting slightly. There was no visible source, no object I could make out inside it, just the glow itself. The air smelled off, faintly metallic, like when you walk past electrical equipment or after a storm, that kind of sharp, clean smell. I noticed it as I breathed in, subtle at first, then more obvious the longer I stood there. I looked up and down the street. No one else around, no windows lighting up, no movement anywhere. I took another step toward the light. The sound of my shoes on the pavement felt muted, like it wasn't carrying the way it should. The usual distant noise, cars' wind was gone. Just quiet. The light pulsed once. Soft. I felt it more than saw it. A slight pressure in my ears, like a quick change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The pressure lingered. I shifted my weight. My fingers tingled slightly where I was holding my keys. I looked down at them for a second, then back at the light. It seemed closer now. Not physically closer, but more present, like it had taken up more space in my attention. I took another step forward. The air felt heavier. Not enough to stop me moving, just enough to notice. The light didn't react. It stayed steady. I tried to see if it was reflecting off the pavement. It wasn't. The ground beneath it looked flat, too flat, like the texture of the asphalt had been smoothed out. I crouched slightly, trying to get a better angle. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it, not a shape, just a darker area, like something was passing behind the glow. Then it was gone. The light returned to being uniform. My chest tightened. Not panic, just pressure. I took a breath. It felt shallow, like I couldn't quite fill my lungs all the way. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I winced slightly. The light pulsed again, stronger. The pressure in my chest spiked. I straightened up, instinctively taking a step back. My movements felt delayed, like there was a fraction of a second between deciding to move and actually doing it. I blinked. The light flickered. Once. Then it was gone. Just gone. No fade, no movement. The street was empty again. Dark. Normal. The sound came back all at once. A car passing somewhere in the distance, a faint breeze moving through the trees, my own breathing, louder than before. I stood there for a second, trying to catch up. The metallic smell lingered faintly, then faded. I looked down at the spot where the light had been. The pavement looked the same as the rest of the street. No mark. No sign anything had been there. I checked my phone. The screen lit up. 1:48. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I'd only been standing there for a minute or two. It hadn't felt like more than that. I unlocked the phone and opened the ride app. The trip wasn't there. No recent rides, no record of the pickup or drop-off. I stared at the screen. I refreshed it, closed the app, opened it again. Still nothing. I checked my messages. No receipt, no notification, nothing to show I'd just been in a taxi. I looked back down the street. Empty. The corner where the car had turned was quiet. No sign it had ever been there. I stood there for another minute, trying to piece it together. Then I walked to my door, unlocked it, and went inside. The house felt normal, warm, quiet. I set my keys down and checked my phone again. 1:49. The time moved forward normally. But the gap between when I got out of the car and when I checked the time didn't make sense, and the ride, it was just gone. Now, whenever I get dropped off late at night, I stay on the step a little longer before going inside, just to make sure the street behind me stays empty after the car leaves. I always shut my bedroom door all the way before going to sleep. Not halfway, not cracked, fully closed until it clicks. It's just a habit. I don't like the hallway light bleeding in or hearing small sounds from the rest of the flat. That night wasn't any different. I remember checking it before I got into bed. I even pushed it once to make sure it latched properly. The hallway light was off, everything quiet. I went to sleep without thinking about it. I woke up suddenly, no dream that I could remember. Just that feeling of being pulled out of sleep without a reason. It was still dark in the room, but not completely. There was a faint light coming from the hallway. I stayed still for a second, trying to get my bearings. The door was open, not wide, just a few inches. Enough for a thin line of light to stretch across the floor and up the wall. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. I knew I'd shut it. The light in the hallway wasn't the usual warm color either. It looked flatter. Flail. Almost white, but not like the normal bulb out there. I pushed myself up slightly on my elbows. That's when I heard the sound. A low hum. Steady. Not loud, but clear enough that I couldn't ignore it. It didn't sound like anything in the flat. Not the fridge, not the heater. It was deeper, more even. It felt like it was coming from the hallway. I stayed in bed for a moment, just listening. The hum didn't change, didn't rise or fall, it just stayed constant. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The air felt different, not colder, just heavier. I took a step toward the door. The light spilling in didn't brighten the room the way it should have. It stayed narrow, contained to that strip on the floor. I got closer. The hum became more noticeable, not louder, just more present, like it was filling the space around me. I reached out and pushed the door open further. It moved easily, no resistance. The hallway was empty and dark, completely dark. No light on, no glow, nothing. I stopped. The hum was gone, just like that. Silence filled the flat. I stood there, one hand still on the door, trying to understand what I was seeing. The hallway looked normal, exactly as I'd left it. I leaned my head out slightly and looked both ways. Nothing, no light source, no movement. I stepped into the hallway. The floor felt normal under my feet. No vibration, no pressure, just the usual quiet. I walked a few steps toward the living room, checking corners, glancing toward the kitchen. Everything was off. No lights, no sound. I went to the front door. Still locked. Chain in place. I checked the windows in the living room. Closed. No sign anything had been disturbed. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. Nothing. Then I went back to the bedroom. The door was still open. The room was dark again, no sign of the light I'd seen before. I stepped inside and looked around. Everything was where it should be. Nothing out of place. I walked over to the bedside table and checked my phone. The screen lit up. 3:12. I stared at it. I was sure it had been earlier when I went to bed. I tried to think back. When I'd last checked the time, it hadn't been anywhere near 3. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the phone again. 3:12. The seconds ticked forward normally. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My chest felt slightly tight. Not panic, just pressure. I took a slow breath. It eased a bit. I looked back at the doorway. The hallway beyond it was completely dark. I stood up and walked over, pulling the door closed again. This time I made sure it latched. I stood there for a second, hand still on the handle. Then I turned back toward the bed. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint, hard to place. Something like ozone or the air after a storm. I sniffed the air again. It was subtle, but definitely there. I walked around the room trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't seem stronger in any one spot. Just present. I went back to the bed and sat down. My hands felt slightly off. Not numb, just a faint tingling in my fingertips. I flexed them a few times. The feeling didn't go away immediately. I checked my phone again. 3:14. It was moving normally. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling. I didn't fall asleep right away. I kept listening, waiting for the hum to come back. It didn't. Eventually, I must have drifted off. When I woke up again, it was morning. Light coming through the curtains. Everything looked normal. I got up, went to the door, and opened it. The hallway looked exactly the same as it had the night before. No light, no smell, no sound. I checked my phone. 7:32. Then I noticed something else. The alarm I'd set for 6:30 hadn't gone off. I opened the clock app. It was still set, still active, but there was no record of it triggering. I stood there in the doorway for a minute, looking out into the hallway. trying to remember exactly how wide the door had been open when I woke up, trying to picture the light, the hum. It all felt real, clear, but the hallway didn't match it. And now, every night before I go to sleep, I still shut the door the same way. Push it until it clicks. But sometimes I wake up for no reason. And the first thing I do is look at the edge of the door, just to make sure it hasn't moved. I went out to check the south gate a little after midnight. It wasn't unusual. If the wind picked up, that gate sometimes rattled loose, and I'd learned not to ignore it. The field stretched out behind the house, open and flat, with a low fence line running along the edge. That night was cold but dry. No wind. The kind of still that makes everything feel sharper. You could hear small things carry further than they should. I grabbed a torch on the way out, but didn't switch it on right away. There was enough light from the yard lamp behind me and the faint glow of the sky. The gravel crunched under my boots as I crossed the yard. The livestock were in the field to the left. A few cattle spread out near the fence. I glanced over at them as I walked. They were standing, all of them, not lying down, just standing still. I slowed slightly. It wasn't unheard of for them to stand like that, but usually there'd be some movement. One shifting, another turning its head. These weren't. They were all facing the same direction, toward the far side of the field. I stopped for a second, watching. None of them reacted to me. No heads lifting, no ears twitching, nothing. I felt a slight unease then, but I pushed it aside and kept walking. The gate was about 50 meters out, where the fence met the corner of the field. As I got closer, I noticed the glow. It was low to the ground, maybe a foot or two above it. Pale. Not bright enough to light up the whole field, but enough to stand out against the dark. At first, I thought it might be someone out there with a light, maybe a neighbor or someone checking their own fence line. But there was no beam, no movement, just that steady, soft glow. I stopped again. The silence felt heavier out there than it had in the yard. I realized I couldn't hear anything. No insects, no distant road noise, not even the usual low sounds from the cattle. I turned slightly, looking back at them. They were still in the same positions, completely still, facing the glow. I swallowed and switched the torch on. The beam cut across the field, landing near the glow. It didn't touch it. The light from the torch just stopped short, like it didn't reach as far as it should have. I frowned and stepped forward. The crunch of my boots sounded dull now, like it was being absorbed instead of echoing. The glow stayed where it was. It didn't react to the torch, didn't flicker, didn't change. I moved closer, about 20 meters away now. The ground beneath the glow looked different, darker, not muddy, just less textured, like the grass had been flattened or smoothed out. I aimed the torch directly at it. The beam passed over the area but didn't seem to illuminate it properly. The edges of the light blurred. I lowered the torch slightly. My hand felt strange. There was a faint tingling in my fingers. I flexed them. The feeling stayed. I took another step. The air changed, subtle at first, then more noticeable. Warmer, not enough to be comfortable, just enough to be wrong for that kind of night. I stopped. The glow pulsed once, soft. I felt it in my chest. A quick tightening, then release. My ears popped, sharp. I winced and swallowed. The pressure stayed. I shifted my weight. My boots pressed into the ground. It felt off. Softer than it should have been. I looked down. The grass beneath my feet looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. I took another step forward. The warmth increased slightly. The tingling in my hands spread up my wrists. The glow didn't move. It just hovered there, steady. I glanced back at the cattle again. Still nothing, no movement, no reaction. They might as well have been statues. I felt a pull then. Not physical, just a sense that I should keep moving forward, like my body wanted to close the distance. I stopped, planted my feet. The feeling didn't go away. I raised the torch again. The beam wavered slightly as my hand shook. For a second, I thought I saw something inside the glow. Not a shape, just a darker area, like something passing behind it. Then it was gone. The glow returned to being uniform. My chest tightened again, stronger this time. I took a step back. The pull eased slightly. The warmth dropped. I took another step back. The tingling started to fade. The glow pulsed again, sharper. The pressure in my ears increased. A high ringing sound cut through the silence. I turned. Without thinking, just turned and started walking back toward the yard. The crunch of my boots returned slowly, at first muted, then clearer with each step. The warmth faded, the air cooled again, the ringing in my ears softened. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the yard. When I did, the glow was gone. The field was dark again, normal. The cattle shifted slightly. One of them lowered its head, another took a step. The usual small movements came back. The silence lifted. I stood there for a second, breathing, trying to steady myself. Then I walked back to the house. I didn't check the gate. I told myself I would in the morning. Inside, everything felt normal. Warm, quiet. I set the torch down on the table. My hands still felt slightly off, like they hadn't fully woken up. I checked the time, 12:48. That didn't seem right. I'd gone out just after midnight. It hadn't felt like nearly an hour. I went to bed not long after. Sleep came, but it wasn't deep. I woke up a few times during the night, each time with that same faint pressure in my chest before it faded. In the morning, I went straight out to the field. The gate was open, wide, not broken, not damaged, just unlatched and swung inward. I stood there for a while looking at it. The latch was the kind you had to lift and turn. It didn't just come loose on its own. I walked out into the field. The grass near the gate looked normal. No marks, no flattened areas, nothing out of place. I looked toward where the glow had been. Nothing there, just the field, flat and quiet under the morning light. The cattle were grazing normally, moving, reacting like nothing had happened. I walked back to the gate and closed it, made sure the latch was secure, tested it twice. Then I stood there for a second longer before heading back. Since then, I checked that gate earlier before it gets fully dark. I don't go out there after midnight anymore if I can avoid it, especially on nights when the air feels too still. I was waiting at the bus shelter a little after 11:30. It sat just outside a small retail park, the kind that shuts down early, so by that time everything around it was dark. The only light came from a street lamp above the shelter and another one further down the road. It had been a damp night. Not raining anymore, but the ground still wet, the air cool and heavy. You could smell the pavement and that faint metallic scent you get after rain. I was the only one there. I checked the timetable on my phone, 11:42. That was my bus. I still had about 10 minutes, so I sat down on the plastic bench and leaned back, watching the road. Cars passed every so often, headlights sliding across the wet surface, then disappearing into the dark further up. Everything felt normal. A little quiet, but nothing unusual. I checked my phone again, 11:36. I put it back in my pocket and listened. The sound of distant traffic, tires on wet road, the occasional engine revving somewhere far off. Then it started to fade. At first I thought it was just a lull, but it kept going. The noise didn't drop gradually, it just reduced, like someone turning down a volume slider. I sat up slightly. The road in front of me was empty now, no cars coming either direction, no sound of anything approaching. Even the faint background hum from further away was gone. I frowned and looked around. The trees lining the edge of the road weren't moving. The air felt still, too still. That's when I noticed the light. It was ahead of me, maybe 20 meters down the road, hovering just above the surface, low, not even as high as a car hood. At first, I thought it might be a reflection, something catching the streetlight at a weird angle, but it didn't stretch or move like a reflection. It held its shape, a soft, dim glow, white, but not harsh, almost muted. I stood up from the bench. My footsteps sounded dull, like they weren't carrying properly. I stepped out of the shelter onto the pavement. The light stayed where it was, steady. I looked up at the street lamp above me. It was still on, but the light from it didn't seem to reach as far as it should have. The road ahead looked flatter, less defined. I took a few steps forward. The closer I got, the more the silence pressed in. Not just quiet, empty. I couldn't hear my own breathing, or maybe I could, but it felt distant. The light didn't move. It didn't react. It just hovered there. I stopped about 10 meters away. The air felt different, heavier, like there was more resistance when I moved. My ears popped, sharp and sudden. I winced and swallowed. The pressure stayed. I shifted my weight. My hands felt slightly numb, like they'd been in the cold too long, but it wasn't that kind of numbness. More like a faint buzzing under the skin. I raised one hand slightly, watching it. The movement felt delayed, just a fraction of a second. I looked back at the light. It pulsed once. Soft. I felt it in my chest. A quick tightening, then release. I took a step back without thinking. The pressure eased slightly. The light stayed steady again. I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road around it looked wrong. Not distorted, just too smooth. Like the texture of the asphalt had been flattened. I leaned slightly to one side, trying to see if there was anything inside the glow. For a second, I thought I saw something darker within it. Not a shape, just a shift. Then it was gone. The light returned to being uniform. My ears rang briefly. A high, thin sound that cut through the silence. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them again, the light was still there, unchanged. I felt that pull again. Subtle, not physical. Just an urge just to step closer. I didn't. I stayed where I was. The light pulsed again, stronger this time. The pressure in my chest came back sharper. My hands tingled more noticeably now, up into my wrists. I took another step back. The sensation eased slightly. I kept backing up until I felt the edge of the shelter behind me. The plastic bench pressed lightly against my legs. The light stayed in place. The silence held. Then, without warning, everything came back. The sound hit all at once. A car passing somewhere behind me, the faint rush of air, the distant hum of traffic. The light was gone. Just gone. The road was empty. Normal. I stood there for a second, trying to catch up. Then I heard the bus, the sound of its engine approaching from the left. I turned. It was already pulling past the stop. I stepped forward, raising my hand slightly, but it didn't slow down. It just kept going. The doors closed. It moved off. I stared at it as it disappeared down the road. I checked my phone, 11:58. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I'd only been standing there a few minutes. The bus should have just been arriving, not leaving. I opened the transit app. The 11:42 bus was marked as departed. No delay, no cancellation, just gone. I looked back at the spot where the light had been. Nothing there. No mark. No sign of anything unusual. The street lamp above it flickered slightly. The steerlet had then steadied. Cars started passing again. Normal flow, normal sound. I sat back down on the bench. My hands still felt faintly numb. My chest still a little tight. I checked my phone again. 11:59. The time moved forward normally. But there was a gap I couldn't account for. And when the next bus came, I stayed inside the shelter the whole time. I didn't step out toward the road again, even when I saw its headlights approaching.